Hello and welcome. I'm Pip Tomson and you're watching W News, broadcasting live from the Al Arabiya headquarters. These are our top stories. The president of South Korea faces impeachment as protesters and MPs call for his resignation after he declared martial law. NATO's Secretary-General pledges to improve intelligence collaboration as he promises to get more military aid into Ukraine. And French Prime Minister Michel Barnier fights for his political life as lawmakers vote on whether to trigger an act of no confidence. Our top story, and South Korea's President Yoon Suk Yeol is facing impeachment after a failed attempt at throwing the country into martial law. The move was revoked only hours after Yoon made the decree yesterday. Our Asian correspondent Chris Gilbert sent us this report.
South Korea's President Yoon Suk Yeol faces impeachment following that late Tuesday night local time decree he made of martial law, which was only revoked hours later, but triggered upheaval in South Korea and protests now calling for him to resign, to step down as president of the country. The opposition party, the Democratic Party, has filed a motion of impeachment against Yoon Suk Yeol that is expected to be voted on by Friday or Saturday, but until then, the country has to live with the aftermath of this decree which was made, Yoon Suk Yeol says, because he alleges that members of the opposition party were pro-North Korea and therefore destabilizing to the safety and security of his country, South Korea, an argument which Parliament did not buy, blocking the move just hours later, and now Yoon Suk Yeol is facing impeachment, which if that happens, he could be stripped of his presidential authority at least until a constitutional court decides his fate. But whether or not he is impeached remains uncertain. The motions of impeachment require 2/3 of Parliament to be successful. At the moment, the main opposition party has a majority, but only about half, about 56%, meaning they need to look to members of Yoon Suk Yeol's own People Power Party to make it successful, which, while that may be difficult, may certainly not be impossible, considering the PPP's own leader, Han Dong-moon, said that he wants to see those behind this decree of martial law held accountable. Now, there have already been resignations that of the chief cabinet secretary and other secretaries inside the PPP, but protesters are calling for more. They want to see the defense minister resign, and of course they want to see the president, Yoon Suk Yeol, step down as well. And experts believe that these calls may only grow and the protests may only grow as long as the status quo continues, and they believe that the move by Yoon Suk Yeol was definitely a political mistake and potentially an egregious overstep.
Chris Gilbert in Tokyo, thank you. Well, let's delve into this a little bit more with the former British Defence and Middle East Minister, Tobias Ellwood. Really good to see you, Tobias, on W News. Thousands of people in South Korea taking part in a candlelit vigil this evening. It really has rocked South Korea. What was your reaction when you saw events unfolding last night? The imposition of the martial law, the protests that followed, and then that U-turn just hours later.
Quite incredible. I mean, how often do we speak about different corners of the world in trouble, conflicts flaring up? It's become so frequent. We've almost become desensitized to it. It's on our TV screens every day. And yet suddenly this was South Korea calling for martial law. My immediate reaction was, what has North Korea done? What has Kim Jong-un instructed his armed forces to do? Has he sent a missile in? Has they crossed the border? Nothing. This was actually all about a president just trying to prop up his own situation. And this is the worrying thing. This is a democratic state, an ally of the West, suddenly calling for martial law. And that perhaps is the concern, is that we're seeing a demise in democracy across the world. And now a president choosing to press that emergency button to call in the military and to call in martial law just to protect, his own future. Quite shocking indeed. I think my concern now, going back to North Korea, is what might they do during this turmoil that you've just been describing, as he's now going to be impeached? Who is leading South Korea at the time? Will North Korea take advantage of the confusion that's now taking place.
And even the United States, one of South Korea's biggest allies, was caught off guard here. So what should Western nations be learning from all this?
Well, firstly, we need to think about South Korea itself, a country that we assume, because that's the way it's been, that this is a peaceful democracy, a high-tech country, a rich country now. But of course, the older generation in South Korea will remember the authoritarian state, the military rule from before. The younger generation, interestingly, have never been exposed to this. And it was them, the youngsters, that went up to those with the guns, pushing the guns back, saying, this is not who we are. But you're right to call out America and America's concerns here, because, of course, they've got 30,000 troops that are on that buffer zone between North and South Korea. Very concerned indeed as to where this might go. We want stability, there's no doubt about it. And they've got rid of a president in the recent past and presume that they'll go through the similar motions now as well. But it is worrying, as I say, when there's global disorder is spreading across the world, that we see a democracy that we see perhaps as a pillar of strength in the Asia area, suddenly toying with the idea that martial law might be the future.
How can South Korea recover from this? I mean, the president, it looks like he will be impeached. How do they go forward? Because, as I said, this has really rocked the country.
It has indeed. As I say, they've been around this buoy a little bit in the past, having to get rid of a previous corrupt president. This one was, I understand, a lame duck leader. He was lost the last general election. That's parliamentary-wise, didn't have the numbers in Parliament to get his legislation through. But I'm pleased in a way that it's ended so peacefully and so quickly. But as I say, worrying that in today's day and age, that a president could even think of calling in the military, seeing helicopters, dropping their troops, abseiling off, onto the roof of the assembly is quite shocking. And I hope that the younger generation will confirm and say, absolutely, this is not what South Korea is all about. We are a peaceful nation. We're a democratically embracing nation. Let's get a new president in as soon as possible, and fresh elections as well. That's what that needs to happen. Mindful of the fact, as I say, that there are adversaries and competitors in the region that wish ill of South Korea and may choose to take advantage of this.
Whilst I've got you, Tobias, you are a former minister for the Middle East. I just wanted to ask you about Syria as well. What did you make of the opposition armed group's successes against the Syrian army in recent days? I understand now that they are on the outskirts of Hama and there are fierce battles taking place.
Yes, this is quite surprising as well. Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, HTS, this is a breakaway affiliate of al-Qaeda that's been in the north of Syria for some time. And it took 4 years for the Syrian armed forces, for Assad to take Aleppo. And now this militia has taken it back in just 4 days as well. The timing of it, I think, is very critical indeed, because what props up Assad and his government is absolutely Iran, is Hezbollah, and of course Russia. And in all three cases, those entities are hugely distracted. And I don't think they're going to be able to come to Assad's aid in the same way as they've done before. Plus the fact that, again, just reading from what I understand, this terrorist group, as they are, actually wants longevity. They don't want to create a caliphate as such, as we saw in the past. They simply want to be an alternative to the Assad regime. And for the people in Syria, there isn't much alternative. And that is the struggle that we have there. But
so that presents a quandary, Tobias, for Western governments, doesn't it? Because should they support President Assad or should they support the opposition?
Yeah, well, it's more complicated than that because, of course, you've got the Kurdish groups as well, the Syrian Democratic Forces. There are an awful lot of groupings there with proxy support from outside the country as well. But I am reminded, and you mentioned the West, how we gave up on this particular part of the world. I was in Parliament at the time. I remember the vote in August 2013, where we voted to basically extract ourselves, handing the space over to Russia completely. So they were then in control of the destiny of Syria, because of course Syria, Assad was struggling after the revolutions that took place after the Arab Spring, was holding on by the skin of his teeth and then bailed out by Russia. So who knows where this was going? Unfortunately, it's the gateway for a lot of the drugs, for a lot of the corruption, a lot of the weapon systems that they're gets into Lebanon as well. But I'm afraid it comes at another time when the world is distracted, when there are so many red lights flashing on the global order dashboard for the West to contend with right now.
It's great to have your insight. Thank you so much. Former British Defence and Middle East Minister Tobias Ellwood.
Thank you.
To Brussels now, and NATO has pledged to boost intelligence collaboration in an effort to curb acts of sabotage by China and Russia. This comes as a two-day meeting of alliance foreign ministers has wrapped up in Brussels. NATO's chief says discussions on continued support for Ukraine were very productive in what was the last gathering of its kind before Donald Trump assumes the US presidency. William Denslow reports from the Belgian capital.
Addressing the media here at NATO headquarters, Mark Rutte, the military alliance's Secretary General, said that members must do more for Ukraine than just help them stay in the fight against Russia. He said that they must help them change the trajectory when that comes to providing more military support, defensive capabilities or more troop training. This comes as Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky has suggested that the only way that Ukraine can achieve a lasting peace is with full NATO membership. On that issue, Mark Rutte says that he believes that Ukraine's future does indeed lie with the military alliance, but says the priority for right now is ensuring that when Kyiv is ready to negotiate with Moscow, it does so from a position of strength. Plenty of focus that has really hung over this meeting of foreign ministers over the past 2 days has been of the Donald Trump presidency that begins in earnest on January 20th in the US, and what Donald Trump's stance on Ukraine exactly will be. On that issue, we've heard from outgoing US Secretary of State Antony Blinken says that now is the time for NATO members to lean in, not lean out when it comes to Ukraine. We've also heard from Mark Rutte praising Donald Trump during his first term in office, saying that Donald Trump helped push NATO allies towards spending more on defence. Mark Rutte says more defence spending is certainly needed in the future. He also had somewhat of a warning for the United States, especially when it comes to other countries allegedly helping Russia in its war in Ukraine to varying degrees, citing the likes of China, Iran and North Korea. On North Korea, he said that it was he said not to be naive to the fact that Russia could be providing potentially missile technology that could in turn directly pose a threat to the United States. On the issue of Iran, Mark Rutte said that in return for Iran providing drones to Russia, Russia was providing Tehran with more finances, which he says were being used to fund its proxies in the region. Rutte says that is a further example of how the war in Ukraine is becoming ever more interwoven, ever more interconnected with crises, other conflicts around the world.
William Denslow in Brussels there. Right, let's take you through some of the stories making the headlines today. Israeli tanks moved into parts of the Khan Yunis area of the Gaza Strip earlier, whilst Palestinian medics say Israeli airstrikes have killed at least 20 people in the area. Families have left their homes nearby and headed towards humanitarian zones in Al-Muassi. A manhunt is underway in New York after a top health insurance executive was shot dead in Manhattan earlier today. 50-year-old Brian Thompson was shot in the chest outside the Hilton Hotel in Midtown Manhattan. It's believed to be a targeted attack. The former Deputy Chief Minister of Punjab, Sukhbir Singh Badal, has survived an attempted assassination at the Golden Temple in the Indian city of Amritsar. A gunman opened fire at the Indian politician at one of the holiest shrines in the Sikh faith earlier today. He's been arrested by police. Sean Diddy Coombs is facing a new lawsuit after being accused of dangling a woman from a 17th floor apartment balcony. The fashion designer Brianna Bongolan alleges the incident took place in 2016 at the home of Diddy's former girlfriend Cassandra Ventura. The musician is currently in federal custody awaiting trial on charges of racketeering and sex trafficking. He denies all the allegations. The mother of rapper Eminem has died at the age of 69. Debbie Nelson, who was often referenced in the rap star's songs, had been battling lung cancer. Many of the musician's lyrics highlighted the mother and son's strained relationship. To France now, and Prime Minister Michel Barnier is awaiting the results of a vote which could potentially topple his government. Opposition lawmakers from the left and right will decide whether or not to trigger a vote of no confidence after Barnier forced through a draft budget without parliamentary approval. We can go live to our correspondent Ross Cullen, who is in Paris. Ross, hello to you. It is a huge day in French politics. Tell us how we expect this vote to be played out.
Yeah, hi Pip. Voting getting underway very shortly, and unless there is something dramatic changing in the voting intentions, it's very likely that this will pass and Michel Barnier will be ousted as Prime Minister because he leads a minority government, and when you add in the votes of the opposition left, the far left and the far right, they have more than enough votes to get this over the line and force Michel Barnier to resign and force the French government to collapse for only the first time since 1962. This doesn't happen very often at all, that the opposition have enough votes to be able to bring down a government, but it's likely to happen this evening.
So who could replace Barnier if lawmakers vote against him?
Well, there are several options open to the president because that's what will happen if he is voted out. He will submit a letter of resignation to Emmanuel Macron, and then it is up to President Macron to decide what happens next. He could ask Michel Barnier to be reappointed, to stay in place and try to build some form of majority around the 2025 budget, which is the crux of all of this. The opposition's opposition to the 2025 budget proposed by the government. And the other option for Emmanuel Macron is to try to appoint somebody else. Now, remember, Pip, that over the summer it took weeks and weeks following the inconclusive election in July for Emmanuel Macron eventually to settle on Michel Barnier to lead a minority government. But time is of the essence. Time is not on Emmanuel Macron's side. He needs to have a Prime Minister in place as soon as possible to get to work back on that budget to try to build a majority, because the 2025 budget must be approved before we get there, so before the 1st of January, and there's only a few weeks left in December.
One of Barnier's fiercest critics, Ross, has been the right-wing leader Marine Le Pen. I think she has been speaking in the last few minutes. Now, she's interesting, isn't she? Because it's being suggested that she could be acting in her own personal interests rather than in the interests of the country.
Well, Laurent Wauquier's, Pip, he's the leader of the moderate Republicans from which Michel Barnier comes, and he was speaking in the last hour in Parliament after Marine Le Pen, and he spent most of the time at the lectern directing his speech towards the far-right leader, saying that she'd always ruled out, she said she would never work with the left wing, never work with the far right, with the far left, and that's exactly what she's doing this evening by voting for the far left motion to oust Michel Barnier. When she was speaking before Mr. Wauquier's, Marine Le Pen said that this is the end of the optical illusion of this ephemeral government. That's how she described Michel Barnier's time in office, saying that the budget he proposed, quote, took the French people hostage. So she is certainly one of the key players in this, because although she's not in government, she does lead the biggest party in Parliament. Her National Rally party have more lawmakers than any other force in the National Assembly.
Lots of talk too about the future of President Macron with a political crisis of this magnitude. I mean, could it bring him down? He's in Saudi Arabia this week. What's he said?
Yeah, and President Macron is due back in about an hour's time or so here in France from Saudi Arabia at the end of his diary booked-in state visit to Saudi Arabia, where he was doing deals and meeting Mohammed bin Salman, the Crown Prince. He is back in time for the results of the vote, in time to see whether his Prime Minister has survived or not. Many people in the opposition ranks have been calling for Emmanuel Macron to step aside, saying that he will be able to unblock all of this chaos if he resigns. Emmanuel Macron says those calls for him to step down are political fiction. He says that he was voted in a presidential election in 2022 by the public to serve a 5-year mandate, and that's exactly what he will do, serve out his 5-year term to 2027. He says that the people put their faith in me, I must there repay their faith. The calls for me to step down are nothing but a fiction. So that's the position as far as Emmanuel Macron is concerned. As far as Michel Barnier is concerned, we'll have to wait not much longer now, about an hour and a half or so, to find out whether he is going to remain as France's Prime Minister or not.
A crucial day in France. Ross Cullen, thank you so much for bringing us right up to date. Returning to today's NATO meeting, and as foreign ministers meet in Brussels, many members, particularly Baltic states, are waiting for Donald Trump to re-enter the White House before making a crucial decision over whether Ukraine will be allowed to join the defence alliance. The US president-elect has been critical of American aid sent to Ukraine and has vowed to end the war in a single day, but without specifying how. Benji Hire reports.
Top diplomats from NATO countries gathering in Europe's political capital to discuss Ukraine. But the real political capital when it comes to the war-torn nation lies with a man several thousand kilometers away, the next US president.
He is arriving at a time where we are very united in supporting Ukraine. And so looking forward to having conversations with the future Secretary of State, Marco Rubio, on this very issue. But I think also that it is up to us to make sure, as strong allies and as supporters of Ukraine, to talk about how much what is happening in Ukraine is fundamental not only to European security, but to North Atlantic security and to the world.
Donald Trump will need some convincing. No wonder NATO Secretary-General Mark Rutte flew out to meet him after his election victory. Trump and his team have been vocal skeptics of sending more funding to Ukraine, having campaigned on a pledge to resolve the conflict, although that could mean pressuring Ukraine into a deal that sees it lose some of its sovereign territory. And Trump's pick for US ambassador to NATO, Matthew Whitaker, is someone he says will, quote, put America first. It's music to Russia's ears.
Even if we're to lay one side the prediction that Donald Trump will cut assistance to Ukraine, which for the Ukrainian army would essentially be a death sentence, it's becoming clearer that he and his team will, in any case, conduct an audit of the assistance provided to Kyiv.
It's why outgoing President Joe Biden is hurriedly taking steps to boost backing to Ukraine in coming months. Just this week, his White House announced a $725 million military aid package, in part to bolster the country's defences and give it a more favourable hand in advance of a Trump term. Back in Brussels, NATO says Ukraine will join its ranks and its path to membership is irreversible, though the alliance has yet to issue a formal invitation. It may be all smiles for now, but the last laugh might come from across the Atlantic, the new US administration providing a potential test for how strong this bond really is. Benji Hire, Arabiya News, Washington.
Bringing you the top business news stories now, and Abu Dhabi, which holds more than 90% of the UAE's oil reserves, has today announced a centralised business registry authority as it diversifies its economy away from oil. The city emirate has plans to move into the tourism, logistics and manufacturing sectors as it seeks future financial growth without the use of fossil fuels. Volkswagen in Germany could face further strikes as the car maker's CEO battled with the company's Labour boss during a staff meeting today. VW chief executive Oliver Bloom warned major cuts were necessary for the manufacturer to respond to Chinese competition. More talks are scheduled for next Monday. 3 of the UK's private rail companies, South West Rail, C2C and Greater Anglia, will become nationalised by next year. The British government believes it will save £150 million investing the money into services rather than the pockets of shareholders. Looking at the sports news, and Novak Djokovic will take part in the Brisbane International on the 29th of December before attempting his 25th Grand Slam at the Melbourne Open next month. The Serbian champion, who recently announced former rival Andy Murray as his new coach, says he's looking forward to being back in Australia. And Tiger Woods believes every American golfer taking part in the Ryder Cup should receive $5 million each to take part, with every cent of that going to charity. Traditionally, players were not paid to compete in the competition, but next year, 12 US players will earn $400,000 each. Tiger Woods says he's never wanted to get paid to play, and the money would be better served elsewhere. Sticking with sport, though, now, and a centuries-old pursuit is still being practised in cities, towns and villages in India. The ancient form of wrestling, a game played in lots of mud, can be tracked back 2,500 years. As Neha Punia reports, despite modern wrestling having become more popular in India, it's the traditional form of the game that keeps bringing players to the mat.
It's one of the world's oldest sports. A game of agility and speed. Wrestling, or kushti as it's called here, is a way of life for these young athletes. And this akhada, or traditional gym on the outskirts of Delhi, has been shaping bodies and fortunes for more than 6 decades.
Only someone with discipline and respect for the game can become a wrestler.
25-year-old Shamshad is a national champion and is training to represent India at the next Olympics. He says there's no better way to train and build stamina.
Mud wrestling matches can go on for 15 to 20 minutes. Professional wrestling matches last 6 minutes only when played on the mat. This isn't like going to the gym where you take supplements. This sport needs an all-natural diet and lots of exercise.
Wrestlers who live and train here also have to stay celibate, eat a vegetarian diet rich in dairy and nuts. For generations, this was considered the best way to stay fit.
You could say this sport defines India, just like yoga does. This sport can transform your life. It brings discipline and strength, mental and physical. It's not just a sport, it's a way of life.
In over 2,000 years, not much has changed in how the sport is practiced, except for the name. In ancient times, this was called Malayuddha, or hand-to-hand combat, and today is better known as kushti, or indigenous wrestling. The rules are simple. Opponents cannot punch or kick, and to win, a player needs to get his opponent to hit the mud in this pit or akhada and keep him down. But even today, when the sport has become modern, competitive and has put India on the world map, it's here at traditional mud gymnasiums that nearly all athletes are introduced to wrestling. They say it's a way to stay connected to their roots. To reach new heights of success, indigenous wrestlers start young, like 13-year-old Mohak, who has been training for nearly half his life now, and carries the weight of a sport that has been in his family for 5 generations.
I wake up at 4 a.m. and run here to train. I come back again in the evening for a second round of training.
But at this traditional gym, like in several others in India, practicing on the mat is also given equal priority, as athletes train for competitive international and national events. At the Olympics, wrestling has been India's second most successful sport. And by earning their stripes in the mud, these athletes say landing on their feet is easy. Neha Punia, Al Arabiya News, New Delhi.
Let's bring you right up to date with our top stories. The President of South Korea faces impeachment as protesters and MPs call for his resignation after declaring martial law. NATO's Secretary-General pledges to improve intelligence collaboration as he promises to get more military aid into Ukraine. And French Prime Minister Michel Barnier fights for his political life as lawmakers vote on whether to trigger an act of no confidence. That's all from us on W News. Thank you for your company. Riz Khan follows me next, and don't miss Tom Burges Watson with GNT. From all of us here, a very good night.
Hello, I'm Riz Khan. Thanks for joining me. This week, two of the year's most keenly anticipated cultural milestones are revealed to the world. Spotify Wrapped and the Word of the Year. Well, exactly 1 year ago, I was surprised and delighted to learn that Riz had been chosen by the Oxford University Press as its Word of the Year. Even better, it was being used to identify someone who possesses Riz as having charm or charisma. This week, my name was sadly replaced by a new word, or actually two words, brain rot. Quite the contrast. So on this edition of the show, we'll find out how Gen Z and social media are changing the language we use. We'll be joined by the creators of this viral video, which earned millions of views for a British museum.
Brat summer is over, bestie. It's time to enter your historical era. The Royal Armouries is the most Sigma day out in Leeds. No cap.
We'll also meet Syria, the all-female psychedelic rock band from Saudi Arabia, who released their debut album today. But we'll start with Spotify Wrapped. And as I speak, tens of millions of music fans around the world are checking their Spotify app to find out who are the biggest artists, songs, and podcasts of 2024. Well, the Wrapped campaign itself has become a viral moment as thousands of artists share their messages with fans, while hundreds of millions of Spotify users share the secrets of their own listening data, the good, the great, and even the regrettable. Well, I'm delighted to say that the managing editor of Spotify in the Middle East, North Africa, and South Asia joins me in the studio to share some of the biggest news regionally and globally. Akshat Harbola, thank you very much for being with me.
Thanks, Riz. Thanks for inviting me.
Pleasure. Now, the Spotify Wrapped event is a huge global event, and it's for artists, podcasters, and the fans, of course. But for those who don't really know what it's about, tell me what it is.
So, Wrapped is our annual thank you to all of the fans, the artists, and the podcasters all across the globe. It's the way we see it. It's our thank you to everyone who soundtracked our life and the world around us. Right? And the way it shows up on your app is you get a personalized user experience, which if you have an updated version of the app, if you don't get it right now, you get to see Wrapped in front of you. Just to give you a sense of the scale and the magnitude of Wrapped, when we launched Wrapped last year, over 225 million users across the globe engaged with Wrapped content. There were 40,000 plus video thank yous from artists that was sent out to their fans, and there were 725 million views of these videos that people engaged with, half of them Gen Z. Right? So that's the scale of Wrapped.
And the amazing thing is it's got a theme each year. So what's the theme this year?
Yeah, so, allow me to step back a little bit. Wrapped has gone through a tremendous journey. This is the 10th year anniversary of Wrapped. It actually started as something that was just reflecting culture all around us, essentially what people were listening to. Cut to now, it's really become this huge cultural moment where artists, fans, podcasters, and other creators are coming together and celebrating all the great music and all the great content that's emerging around us. Right? In 2024, Wrapped is a global brand campaign. It's a personalized user experience. There's an artist experience, and there is a podcaster experience as well. Right? So all of that coming together with Wrapped in 2024, we're celebrating this year where we think that culture has been shaped. fandom has been explored in very unique ways, and new music has been created. Right? So this is what Rap 2024 is all about.
Well, actually, Spotify users love sharing their own information, their own results and data, but the big headline grabber is what you call the global top lists. And that's the artists, albums, songs and podcasts with the most plays on the platform. So let's have a drum roll, and it's time for the big reveal. Tell us.
All right, let's go for it. So starting with the most streamed global artist this year, second year in a row, it's Taylor Swift.
1, 2, 3.
So for Taylor Swift in particular, for the Swifties, for the fans of Taylor Swift, we have some special experiences built into the app. So if you get into the app, you will see a global top artist badge come in front of Taylor Swift's profile this year. For the first time ever, we're doing this in the app. So that's the first thing you'll see. You'll also see, on-platform Easter Bunny kind of an experience, which means that depending on what track of Taylor you're streaming, you'll see in-app mini animations popping up. Mm-hmm. So, for example, if you're streaming 1979, then you may see sparkles or you may see seagulls if it's another album, right? So, some in-app innovations coming out, and then we know that Swifties are crazy about friendship bands, right? So we're creating an augmented reality friendship band that people can get into Snapchat and get access to for the global top artists this year. So that's the experience for Swifties, just to celebrate the number one artist, right. Taylor Swift. Number 2 on the list is Weeknd. Number 3, Bad Bunny. Number 4 is Drake. And finally, rounding out the top 5 is Billie Eilish.
Amazing.
Yeah.
She's been around for a while then.
She's been around for a while, yes, 100%.
And it sounds like the artists are directing how Spotify shapes the experience directly. So it's quite, I don't know about collaborative, but certainly it's interactive.
It's very interactive, and look, ultimately Spotify is a very personalized experience, right? So the more you consume of a certain artist, the more of them or similar artists you start seeing in your Spotify experience too. So what you're saying is absolutely correct, right? And maybe jumping onto the top stream songs, because that's where it starts getting a little bit exciting, right? So in the top stream songs, we have Sabrina Carpenter's smash hit Espresso, which is also most likely I'm just predicting yet. I haven't seen my rap results. It's probably my number 1 stream track as well. So Sabrina Carpenter's Espresso is number 1. Number 2, you see Beautiful Things by Benson Boone. Okay. Amazing genre-bending track that we've seen come out this year. On number 3, Billie Eilish again, Birds of a Feather. She's on number 3. On number 4, we see Gata Only, Floy Menor and Chris MJ. Floy Menor is a Chilean artist. And then on number 5, we have Lose Control by Teddy Swims. Again, has to be on my top 5 as well. Right? So this rounds out the top 5 songs for 2024.
Do any of the things I might listen to, slightly more retro, ever come up into the modern songs, and the streaming is really based on what younger people are listening to, I guess. I don't know.
A large part of our user base tends to be young, Gen Z and younger millennials. But the good part about Wrapped is it's not just about the top list, it's also about the personalized list. So when you log into your Wrapped personalized experience and share that with your buddies, you'll see a lot of commonalities.
I'll be revealing that.
Yes.
I'll be revealing that on this show.
Yeah.
What about podcasts? That's really changed a lot about the way people consume information, news, and even kind of entertainment.
Yes, 100%. So podcasts are growing phenomenally. We entered the podcasting space in 2019, and since then, 500 million people have heard a podcast on Spotify. So we're seeing a tremendous amount of growth. When it comes to the top list, the Joe Rogan Experience is on number 1, the 5th year in a row. Wow, right? Yeah. So that continues to be the top podcast anywhere in the globe. And then following that, you have Call Her Daddy, which is incredibly popular. We have Huberman Lab, which is a science-based podcast, one of my top podcasts personally. You have this past weekend with Theo One, and then you have The Diary of a CEO, incredibly popular in this region as well, by Stephen Bartlett.
Yeah.
So that is the podcasting story for 2024.
Now, beyond Wrapped, how has 2024 worked out for Spotify in terms of business and you know its general growth and positioning?
So 2024 has been a very successful year for us. We've done very well across most of the business metrics as well as product metrics that we track internally. Our Q3 results just came out, and we reported strong results across revenue, across monetization and profitability. Just to share a couple of them with you, we've now crossed 640 million users across the globe, and we've crossed the milestone of 250 million paid subscribers across the globe. Right? So healthy user growth, healthy monetization. Where our revenues are growing at 19% year on year.
Amazing.
And we're not just on track, we're probably ahead of where we thought we'd start the year. And this year is most likely going to be the first fully profitable year where each quarter Spotify has been profitable.
Let me ask you, apart from the global picture, you yourself deal with the Middle East, North Africa and South Asia, a massive chunk of the global music market, of course. And we're going to focus on the first two today, what you call the MENA region, Middle East, North Africa. Tell me about some of the aspects of how that region, the products from here, the people from here, the artists and so on has grown.
Yeah. So this region is very interesting because it's very heterogeneous, even though it's seen as Middle East and North Africa. So it's seen as a monolith if you're seeing it from the outside. But it's very, very heterogeneous. So you have a market like Morocco, right, which is an Arabic-speaking country, but has influences of Darija. It has influences of French. Then you have Egypt, which is the mother of civilization, has its own music culture. You have Saudi Arabia, which has the Gulf music, or what is known as Khaliji music. Right? So a very, very diverse landscape. I'm seeing two big trends in this region. Number one, the mainstream genres still continue to be very, very relevant. Right? That's what we see in our rap data.
That's what I was going to ask, because rap must give you a lot of information.
Exactly. So, and when I say mainstream, it means different things in different markets. So in a market like Saudi Arabia, Khaliji rules. So you have an artist like Ayad, who's the reigning prince of Khaliji music and really redefining the sound of what Khaliji looks like, really doing well on our charts. But you also have the legends like Abdul Majid Abdullah or Rashid Al-Majid being number 2 and number 3 on our charts for local artists. Then you go to a market like Egypt, where you have a combination of emerging talent, like Too Late doing really, really well, but the traditional biggies like Amr Diab or Shireen also being very, very dominant on the rap tracks. Right? And then you have a market like Morocco, where traditionally pop and Spotify hasn't done very, very well, but this year we've seen the resurgence of pop music, and it's doing really well on our top charts in Morocco. So that's the first theme that I see. The second theme that I see is that the hyper-growth genres, and some of them called street genres, have rapidly exploded in the region. Right? One example of that would be Mahraganat in Egypt, which, the best way of defining that would be electrifying street music with, huge dollops of electronica, hip-hop, and auto-tune, and you have this genre called Mahraganat. It has a very DIY ethos, so sometimes the artists in their own studios are producing 3 to 4 tracks a week. And that sort of intensity is showing up on our rap charts. 40% of our rap charts for Egypt are Mahraganat. So two big trends. One is the mainstays are still the mainstays, pop music, Khaliji music. But then these genres, which just emerged in the last 5 years, or maybe, depending on the genre, 5 to 10 years, are really hitting mainstream now in the region.
And that's actually what's interesting is the listening habits of people in different cities. And I guess Spotify's data can give a very accurate impression of that.
100%. Once you start looking at cities, it becomes really, really interesting. So let's start with Riyadh, for example. Riyadh is essentially a mirror of our global trends. So the top artist list that I shared with you a few minutes back, the only difference between Riyadh and the rest of the world is Bad Bunny doesn't show up in the top 5. Instead, Travis Scott does. Right? Okay. And Travis Scott has performed in Riyadh a few times in the last couple of years, so maybe that's got something to do with that. So Riyadh, very clued on with the global trends, but also, like I said earlier, consuming a lot of Khaliji music. Right? So that's Riyadh. Mumbai is the city of love. Right? Irrespective of how you cut it, whether it's Bollywood music, whether it's iPop music, or whether it's upbeat music or mellow music, it's all about love. Right? So artists like Arijit Singh, artists like Shreya Ghoshal, artists like Pritam are emerging as top artists in a city like Mumbai. So that's Mumbai for you. And then let me tell you what's going on in Dubai or Miami, which are the cultural melting pots, right? Miami, Bad Bunny is on top. And that reflects the Latin connections of that city. Right. So, very clearly Bad Bunny has to be on top, while other global artists continue to do well in Miami. And in Dubai, the city where we're sitting right now, this is an international city. There are 180 nationalities that live here. So Taylor Swift on top in Dubai. She's the #1 streamed artist in Dubai. But you also see Korean sensation Jin with his single Astronaut doing really, really well here. And then the Indian icon Arijit Singh doing very, very well here in Dubai as well. So depending on which city you go to, very interesting trends start emerging.
And how well does music from the MENA region travel around the world to other audiences?
So the music from the region has been traveling as people from the region have been traveling and finding new homes across the globe. So when we look at our data, we see large number of streams in the US and broader North America, in Europe, because a lot of the diaspora, the Arab diaspora, lives in these areas. And listening to music from the likes of Feroz, Shireen, Amr Diab, Abdul Majid Abdullah is a connection back to home, irrespective of where you are. Right? But what we've seen this year is very exciting. Artists who have roots in this region are starting to step into the global mainstream of music. I'll give you 2 examples. Saint Levant has performed at Coachella this year. Eliana has performed with Coldplay this year, and she's part of one of their tracks on their latest album. The track is called We Pray. Right? So a lot of the artists from this region are hitting mainstream when it comes to global pop culture. The final example there is one of the Egyptian rappers, Muhammad Ramadan, is likely to play at Coachella next year. Right? So some very interesting developments in terms of music from this region traveling across the globe.
Actually, what are the challenges and the opportunities for Spotify in a country like Saudi Arabia? You gave us that profile of Riyadh as a city, just fascinating, actually. But, we have Saudi Arabia as a country that's come through rapid transformation, of course, heading toward its 2030 goals in terms of what it wants to achieve in terms of culture and music. What are the challenges and the opportunities for you?
Right. So, like you said, Saudi Arabia is going through a massive transformation across many different sectors, including media and entertainment, right? And we're seeing this happen in music as we speak. The number of concerts that Riyadh has seen over the last couple of years is unparalleled. If I have to guess, these many concerts the number of concerts in the last 2 years are probably more than the combined number of concerts in the last 20 years. Right? So that is the intensity of the music scene development. The biggest challenge that I see is that compared to a market its size, the volume of music output is still relatively low, which means that we, along with the government and the rest of the industry, still need to do a lot more to incubate the music ecosystem, to inspire the next generation of artists so that this music economy becomes a really healthy and a vibrant music economy, which it will in a few years from now.
That actually came to mind because Spotify is such a powerful platform. And I wonder what Spotify does to help artists break into the industry and perhaps even take it to the next level.
Yeah. So at its core, Spotify provides access to millions and millions of fans in your market and across the globe. Right? And the way we do that is through expert curation and by providing recommendations to the users that make sense for the artists as well. Right? So that is Spotify's core value proposition. But what we do in different markets and depending on the needs of the market is build artist development programs to take the artists from the current level to the next level. An example of that would be a program like Radar, which focuses on artists which are on the cusp of breaking through the mainstream league. Right? So we would provide them access to Spotify best practices, marketing resources, and general hand-holding when it comes to doing well at Spotify. And then depending on the needs of the market, we would also consider incubator programs or residency programs where the most important need in the market is to incubate early-stage talent and support them in their journey to become bigger over time.
On that note, let's touch on your Fresh Finds artist residencies and how that works and how that benefits artists.
Right. That one I'm incredibly proud of. We've just wrapped up our Fresh Finds residency program in Saudi Arabia. Mm-hmm. And the way this program runs is we identify a set of artists who represent the sound of the market, and then we provide them access with the best expertise and the best knowledge that's available in the market. So we just wrapped up our program in Saudi Arabia, where there were 4 artists. They were paired with regional producers, and they were given instructions and provided expertise on things like music marketing, production, knowing about copyright and the like, and everything that an artist needs to know as they're at the ground floor of their journey upwards. Right? And I'm happy to say that we now have 4 tracks coming out of that program, and I've been personally vibing to those tracks, and I would recommend you do that as well.
Well, actually, yeah, so we're about to speak to one of the Fresh Finds artists, the psychedelic rock band, the all-female rock band from Saudi Arabia called Syria, and I wonder what it was like working with them.
Oh, it was incredible. They're incredibly determined, incredibly hardworking and disciplined. Psychedelic rock is something I've personally sort of enjoyed over the last 20 years. So when I've discovered Syria, I think it was sometime last year, I was very excited by their sound. They've come out with a new track called Nafas, and I would highly recommend all of your viewers give it a listen. It's a good track and one of the results of this residency that we just wrapped up. We hope to do more of this, both in Saudi, but also in other markets where this would be relevant.
It's wonderful. It sounds like there's a lot of talent waiting to be discovered. And you guys have the power and the platform to do it.
100%. We're committed to doing this.
Well, actually, I'm going to be sharing my Spotify Wrapped results a little later as well. But I want to thank you very much in the meantime for joining me. Thanks for being here.
Thanks, Riz. Appreciate the opportunity. Yep.
Well, Akshat mentioned that one of the artists Spotify has been supporting in the Middle East is Syria, a 4-member all-female psychedelic rock band from Saudi Arabia. So let's take a listen to some of their music. That's a clip from their single Wahm Al-Kimma from their debut album released today titled Al-Mujallad Al-Awwal. That in English means Volume 1. And the 4 band members join us now from their rehearsal room in Riyadh. Syria, I want to welcome you to the show. Great to have you as a band on. I'm going to start by asking each of you to just give me a couple of lines on your background, how you got involved in this, and what role you play. And Noura, I'll start with you, basically.
Hi, my name is Noura. I'm the lead vocalist. I also play the keys and synth. I've always had a passion for the little details in music, which is why I got into production. I also have a background in classical music, and that's my roots, starting from the age of 15. And since then, we've adapted, we moved, we fusioned the situation, and we're here.
Hi, I'm Thing. I'm Syria's drummer. Yeah.
Oh, I thought we were going to get more than that from Thing.
Hi, I'm Mish. I'm the bassist. I like being the glue that brings the song together. And I got into music through Guitar Hero. Was a big metalhead, but kind of like dispersed or whatever. Yeah.
Hi, I'm Haya. I'm the guitarist. And I like to spice things up with the Arabic scales that I play, and I like to make things psychedelic with the many, many, many pedals that I have. I have an endless supply of guitar pedals and many more to come.
You sound like my brother, who's a guitarist, and I couldn't count all the pedals he had. Nora, as the lead vocalist and fronting the band in some ways, tell me about the kind of impression you're trying to make as a band. What was your goal as a band as you came together?
I think our biggest goal was to tell stories. We wanted to tell stories that the audience could resonate with, from challenges from our real life, and I think that's our biggest goal. We also really want to inspire the younger generation to pick up an instrument, express themselves, sing however way they want, play however way they want, and yeah.
I know, Mish, you're Nora's sister, and I'm wondering what it's like, because, when family's in a band, you've got the relationship in the band and the relationship outside. How does that work?
I mean, there's definitely a benefit to it. Like, a lot of times it would be like 3 a.m. and I can't sleep and she can't sleep, and we'd just meet up somewhere and write or jam. But you need to know how to separate like home life from band life and just disassociate the two when you need to.
Now, did you all have a long career in music? Because I know, Nora, you were saying you've been playing since you were a kid and so on. And I wonder, for example, Haya, did you have a long career in music?
Professional career, no. Actually, the first time I had ever received a paycheck from music was with these two girls. I was 28 years old. But the first time I actually started playing the guitar was 20 years before that. I was 8 years old when I started playing guitar. And I started playing piano around the age of like 4. So in terms of having a musical background, yeah, it's been a number of years. But career, no, that's very new, as it is very much new in Saudi in general.
And thing, of course, people are going to see you there on the drums. Some might be intimidated by the fact you've got that look. Explain that look to me.
I'll tell you 100%, I'm the scariest person in the band. I pass by, people don't see me coming and they're like, whoa, what's going on? Some people go, Bismillah, It's really funny. But, so this mask is basically used to reside in my mom's salon at home. She had collected these vintage and really old pieces from the Arabian Peninsula. They're like antiques, like bangles, necklaces, daggers, things like that. And I remember seeing this one for the longest time ever. So when the band formed 2 years ago and we were about to perform, I thought I would wear, a mask, because I really love Slipknot, Daft Punk, Kiss. Everybody had hidden their identity. It was this element of mystery, and I really liked it as a gimmick, like a prop. And I thought it'd be really cool to wear one. So I got it to the band. And I'm like, what do you guys think? And they loved it. They were like, yeah, it works. So that's the story.
And thing, I saw you in this rehearsal studio video wearing a T-shirt with Korn on it, and I know you're a big fan of Korn.
Yeah.
I was wanting to ask you what your music influences are generally.
Well, I would have to say it's a mixture between new metal, classic rock, prog rock. I listen to a lot of music, hip hop, rap. I think because I play drums, and it's mostly the beats and the percussion and everything that gets me to become really creative. So I really enjoy listening to everything, and then it kind of just stays somewhere in my memory, so that when you write music, it just all comes together naturally, and
So Nora and the rest of you also, just give me an idea of your musical influences.
My influence growing up was I really loved classical music. I loved Beethoven, Mozart, Chopin, and then I also loved rock and metal. So there was always this blend and mix of different influences, and I think that's really what makes Syria unique, is that we all have different tastes in music. We have a lot of similar interests, and all that together creates this new sound that's different.
Yeah, so we're clearly all very much influenced by rock and metal. But I'm also super influenced by classical music too, and what I love about having Noura in the band is that sometimes I'll hear a classical piece and, you know, I'll show it to people and they're like, oh, okay, nice. But then I'll show it to Noura. She's like, whoa, I hear that and I hear this. And then we take elements of it and we allow it to influence our own style and our own sound. But my ultimate influence and the way that Sira came to be is there's a band called Altingun. It's a Turkish or Anatolian folk psychedelic rock band. So in April 2022, I found Mish and Noura on Instagram, and I saw that they were doing music together, which I thought was very touching. And I had seen that Mish was posting covers of The Doors, and so I just reached out to her. I was like, "Hey, are you based in Riyadh? This is an album that I'm very much influenced by, and I want to, make music similar to this. I want to put a band together. Are you open to it?" So she listened to it. And she was like, "Yeah, I'm totally open to it." And we met up, and she was telling me, "Hey, by the way, I have a sister that's a musician too, and me and her have always wanted to be in a band together. So how about I invite her over so we can have a jam?" And Noura did come over, and it was just surreal being with two other women from Saudi that had such a shared vision and goal and dream. And we're talking about touring, and we're talking about playing in different venues. But we had that one missing link, which was Thing. And when we did find Thing, actually that was really that's what completed the puzzle. And we later found out that she also had this dream of being in a band, of going on tour, of playing to audiences. So like I feel I feel goosebumps as I'm talking about this right now. So I'm going to pass the mic before I start tearing.
Yeah, Mish, I was going to say, because, you said you had influences including like metal style music. I think a lot of people would be surprised to find 4 young Saudi women with these kind of musical influences.
I mean, with the help of the internet, like, you could get into anything. And Guitar Hero kind of helped me like discover all these metal bands and stuff. So yeah.
What do you think, Mish, is the most kind of misunderstood thing? Because people are going to be watching this and saying 4 Saudi women playing this kind of music or have this kind of influence on them. I think there's a lot of stereotyping. How much are you having to deal with that?
I mean, maybe like, well, we were told before, like, if you did a genre that was more digestible, like pop and stuff, you would go really big and whatever. But we wanted to do our own thing, whatever that thing was. And people seem to like it, and the metal scene and rock scene in Saudi is growing more and more. I mean, Metallica came to Middle East last year, and this year they're getting Muse and 30 Seconds to Mars. So it's not really like, there are a lot of people that are into this music here.
All right. Thing, you were saying that you're a self-taught drummer, like me essentially. Were there any musicians in your family that had any influence on you?
No, there are no musicians in my family. I am actually the first musician in my entire family's history. My parents' descendants, to my knowledge, were not musicians either. So yeah, that's an interesting thought.
And how has your family reacted to you being part of a band like this?
No, my parents were very supportive. My dad actually came to our debut show with my mom, and my siblings came too, but like my parents were there. And before, when I started learning drums and I got the drum set to my house, my mom was like, a drum set? Where are you going to play this? Who are you going to play with? And then, when I was on stage that day, I'm like, look, I'm playing with Sira. I'm in a band now. The drum kit 10 years later was very useful. So that was really cool.
Yeah. And Noura, you explain the name Sira, because we were talking a little bit earlier just before we started the interview itself, and it means journey.
So when we first came up with the name, I remember like we were all on the phone together and we're just saying random words. Okay, what are we? Camel funk? Are we? Hey, I was hungry. She was like naming all the dishes in the world. We're not going to be called French fries. Okay, forget that. Curly fries is not going to happen. And then Sira came, I think, because we all had a mutual vision of telling stories, and that's really what resonated with us. We're like, this is actually going to impact our music. It's going to help us. So it is our journey. Yeah.
And it's short and sweet. Like,
Yeah.
Rolls off the tongue.
Haya, just give me some idea of what the challenges are in having a musical career in Saudi Arabia as it's kind of coming out of this shroud for a lot of people in the West.
We see no challenges, just opportunities for growth.
Very good.
Yeah, I mean, the challenges have been, just the...
What outfit to wear.
What outfit to wear now. The challenges have been like all these opportunities that we've been getting. Like, there's so many choices. We get all these requests for bookings and stuff, and it's just like, do we want to be in Al Ula this weekend or in Jeddah?
could I take this? I mean, I think the main challenge would be like not enough venues or resources or institutions, or because we're still building that all together. But as time passes by, there's more and more opening up. So it doesn't seem like these challenges would last too long.
Well, that's what I was wondering, how you find rehearsal areas, studios, how you get involved with record labels, because this is all quite early days for Saudi Arabia.
I think you've definitely named the challenges right there in that question. Yeah.
I really want to say that whatever facilities... One second, yeah. So I want to say whatever facilities that we have available right now, because the industry here locally is growing at a really fast pace. And I think what they're trying to do, there are a lot of efforts in creating all these facilities to support musicians in whatever way possible. And I think all of this is great. And I just want to highlight that Syria are independent musicians. In the beginning, before we were joined by our manager, we were basically handling everything on our own, our debut show, our promotions. And we were approached, from local labels and like institutions and things like that. But we really wanted to go at it alone, and we really liked the journey of kind of organizing things and trusting each other and working together. And I think that's what built our trust more, that we're more of a unit, and we've made our dream come true. We launched an album, we did something together. It's a really emotional time for us. Yeah, we're going on tour. We're doing all these really cool things that we never dreamed of doing. And I think just that feeling on its own has been surreal, and then they can continue with the adjectives.
Things are moving a mile a minute thanks to the Music Commission, Vision 2030. I think maybe the biggest challenge was that we didn't have enough institutions at the time to learn music theory and all that stuff. But it's also very important to have people you can, relate to, jam with, have fun with, and that creates the passion, because music is an art form. So art is beautiful in all its forms. So yeah.
Yeah, and Spotify was playing quite a big part in your development as well, I gather. They seem to be great fans of yours. We spoke with the head of the region, and they're very big fans. What role did they play, and how have they helped move things along for you?
So Spotify actually put together an accelerator program, and something that they really supported us with is, I know that each one of us, ever since we formed the band, have been talking about, getting involved with an artist in residency program. And Spotify made that a reality for the first time. And not just that, they also connected us with one of the top, most groundbreaking producers in the region, El Waili. So we really are big fans of Spotify too, because they really made that reality. They've helped us accomplish our first artist in residency program, our first collaboration with someone like El Waili. I'm getting people I know from past lives messaging me saying, hey, we're big fans of El Waili. We just heard your music. That's amazing. So really getting our sound out there, which we're really grateful for. And not just that, I'll let my bandmates also speak some more, but everything from, we've done so many different workshops on music production, on social media, marketing, music marketing, on how to use Spotify as a platform as artists, and I'll let the rest of the band continue in chiming in.
One of the key things I should point out is that you've also been hailed as the kind of groundbreaking female phase of music coming out of Saudi Arabia. That's a double-edged sword because the expectations are high. So do you see that as a blessing or a burden?
It's definitely a blessing. I think we have a lot of passion in us. We have drive. We got the fire, and we just want to help people, move and dance and just loosen up because life is fun, and that's pretty much it. So it's not been. I feel like it's just a beautiful opportunity for us really to help the younger generations really pick up an instrument, play music, see what they like, and make an impact.
Let's talk about some of your tracks, and I'm going to just take you through the styles because you've got a very eclectic sound. It's really fascinating. The influences have come in. Let me ask you about a couple of these songs. Let's start with the one in English. It would be Illusion of the Summit, Waham al-Qimma.
It's about how, you always think that, if I get this done, I'll get to the top, and then you drop back down, and it's a cycle, but you need to find happiness in the process.
What is the process for you guys working together in terms of the songwriting, where the lyrics come from? Who is there one person that particularly sets the tone, or do you really chip in different ways?
I mean, usually we write the music first, and then Noura would write the lyrics over it. So someone would just bring up a chord progression, some transitions, something that they noodled with and liked, and then we'd all sit together, and we have this board in our practice space where we write the emotion of each section of a song. So this is supposed to feel chaotic, this is supposed to feel melancholic, whatever that is. And the more we play it, the more ideas we come up with. And Noura takes it from there with the lyrics.
Tell me about the work you did together with the song Nafas.
Yeah, so we got into the studio, and it was the first time that we got into a studio with a non-band member. And for him, it was the first time that he collaborates with a band, with a live band, because usually he collaborates with vocalists or with other musicians, but separately and not collectively. And each one of us really just brought something that was stored in our subconscious. For example, I can speak specifically to my contribution in that piece. You can hear a bit of a Saharan desert blues kind of feel to it, and that's something that's always been lodged in my psyche and would peep out with Sira, but really in this track, that's when it kind of just sprouted.
Let's talk about one other song here, Al-Fana, Oblivion.
About always feeling like you have a lot of questions that you have no answer to, that you're lost in life's corners, overthinking things that are kind of meaningless, and the bigger picture is different. So that was really our inspiration.
And that's the beauty of what you can do with what your band, with what you're doing, is you can combine these elements of Middle Eastern music with all the Western influences you've had and have quite a unique sound.
So the story behind Shara al-Buhtari, it's actually very ironic. we wanted to find a way where we can tell, we wanted to delve into the topic of mental health awareness, and this is something that's very important for us. But we also wanted to make the music a little bit lighthearted and have people still be able to move and dance to it, kind of like, the Smiths and how they have this fun element and twist. It's a bit ironic. So from that, I guess the story created itself, and the story delves into a character, which is a girl who wakes up and she has kind of a conversation with her anxiety, and it tells her, you need to find a way out. So the song delves into, okay, how is she gonna find that healing? And she meets like-minded people, and suddenly she realizes that she's not alone, and that changes everything for her.
And that video of that shows a warehouse, which is a popular music venue in Riyadh, I gather.
Yeah.
How was it being in front of a live audience like that?
Oof. Our first show was in the warehouse, actually, and to our surprise, it was a full house. Everyone was there cheering us on. It was just a magical experience. Our legs were shaking. We looked like leaves, But once we got on the stage, it just felt so natural for us to be performing. Like we were made to do this. And I think the highlight of the show itself was just hearing everyone go, Syria, Syria, Syria. And we're like, okay, there's a future here, because this is a dream. It's a dream we've had for years. And seeing that kind of come to life, it just really was a chance for us to... Okay, I'll give Tina a second.
And really, congratulations to you. It's amazing what you've done. You just released your album, so congratulations on that too. And you have tour plans. Tell me about those.
So we played our first show ever to a live audience on the 4th of May, which was a Thursday. And around, Tuesday, we were like, okay, no one knows that this is happening. How are we going to promote it? So we put a post up on Instagram, and we promoted it. And I remember we were talking to one another, and we were saying, okay, listen, there's not much promotion. We've had 2 days of promotion. It's very likely that only 5 people will show up, 2 of whom are Thing's parents. Okay, so but then we turn up to the concert, to our first concert, and it's sold out. The crowd goes back as far as the eye can see. And my sister, just to paint the picture, my sister came in maybe a few minutes late. She was 5 minutes late, and we were getting through our first song, and she had to tell the person at the reception who was selling the tickets, because tickets were sold out. She had to be like, hey, that's my sister on the stage, so that they would, be like, okay, come in, even though it's sold out. We had some pretty influential influencers that wanted to attend, but it was completely sold out. So we're like, we don't care how many followers you have on Instagram. You don't show up in time, then you miss out. And tour.
No, let me ask you one thing about this. There you are, this massive crowd, as Hayes just described. You're looking out over it, and you've got to have your voice together and sing. What was going through your head as you looked out over that sea of people?
Well, something about me is that I'm kind of a perfectionist, so before a show, I'm going to prep it to the max. I'm going to wear the outfit that we're going to perform in and everything on the keys, and I'm going to act like I'm talking to an audience. And I think that method really helps me a lot in the live show, especially, the speech segments. Stage fright is actually one of the most things that people are afraid of in the world. So it's a very common fear. But I think the more we practice it, I think looking at the stage and seeing, my girls and my sister, and knowing that there's, a lot of love on stage, it really helps us get through. I saw my cousins in the crowd, and everything felt great. Everyone in the first row were our loved ones, and they were cheering so loud. It felt just destiny. It was destiny, really. It was destiny.
Well, Thing, why don't you pick up on this idea of the touring and the tour plans? Do you expect to get out there international touring anytime soon?
Well, yes, we're in the process of organizing a tour in Saudi. We want to expand to MENA region, and then possibly even do a world tour, if anything. And we're pretty stoked about that.
And if anyone's asking, what would they expect from a Syria concert? How would you describe it in a line?
It's an ebb and flow of emotions and excitement. I would definitely recommend, if you're interested in interesting music, you should definitely come and listen to us, because we really know how to put on a show. We have a lot to say through our music, it's a guaranteed pleasure, and I only say this humbly because not from my opinion, but from the opinion of the fans that have attended our multiple shows and have shown us a lot of emotion. There were tears, there were joy. People were like hugging us after the show. We were getting a lot of, you inspire me. Some people were even, you know, covering the bassist and the guitarist, you know, the songs. And that's amazing because, you know, we never really imagined that. And I think that's the type of impact you want to make on your audience. They're like engaged. And, you know, that's why I say if you want to enjoy a show, you can come.
Well, you guys are cutting edge, not only in the fact that you've made such a name for yourself already with the first female Saudi group playing, you know, this kind of very unique type of music as well and blend of stuff, but also because you're going to be role models for a lot of young musicians. And I wonder, when it comes to these young musicians, particularly women and girls, perhaps even from your region, what would be the advice you'd give them on taking up the career that you guys have managed to achieve?
Honestly, our first piece of advice would be just do it. It sounds cliche, it sounds very overused and oversaid, but really just take the first step. Connect with other people around you. If your style is to make music with other people, just like it is for us, then connect with other people. If your way of doing it is more solo, then get in front of the keys, get in front of a guitar, take the lessons, spend the time, put yourself out there on Instagram. Put yourself. If it wasn't for Noura and Mish putting themselves out there and making, recording themselves playing together and playing alone, we would have never found each other. So, and also something that I know is the same for each and every single one of us. We've always wanted to be in a band. And, you know, for some of us, this happened later in life than others. And the one thing that we kept saying when people would ask us, hey, are you in a band? We would say, no, we're not in a band yet. We wouldn't shut it down by saying, no, we're not in a band. It's never going to happen, because it doesn't seem like it's going to happen now. So really hold on to that hope. Dream your reality into existence. This is what each and every single one of us has done. And yeah, it's all possible. As much of a far reality as it might seem, if you do the work, if you show up every day, if you keep a good head on your shoulders, you keep a good attitude, you will get there. And also, of course, if you lean on one another, then you will get there.
Well, listen, I know that you guys are doing amazing things and you've got a long way to go to carry on and take this out to the world. I wish you a lot of luck. I'll be the old guy out there pumping my fist when I see you in concert live. Looking forward to it very much. Mish, Haya, Noura, and of course Thing, all the best to you. Well, as promised, here are my Spotify rap results. My #1 song seems to be Stronger by Clean Bandit, one of my favorite bands, absolutely brilliant. And I know I did listen to that quite a lot, especially early on. And then it's interesting to see what else came up. We've got John Mayer, one of my favorite artists, absolutely brilliant. Chris Rea, A Blast from the Past, I've listened to a lot of him over the years. And then a couple of relaxing, mellow ones. The theme from Harry's Game by Clannad, and Enya's Only Time. Those are my relaxing soundtracks. So absolutely fascinating. What a nice flashback from the past. As music evolves with each new generation, so does our use of language. A 65-year-old museum curator in Northern England recently became a familiar face with more than 10 million viewers when he popped up on TikTok providing a guide to the Leeds armories. He did so by addressing Gen Z in their own language, with hilarious results. Now he's a recognized star both online and in public. I'm joined now by the dude himself, to use apparently what's a Gen X word. Senior curator Mark Murray-Flutter, with the creative genius behind the idea, communications officer Katie Glover.
Brat summer is over, bestie. It's time to enter your historical era. The Royal Armouries is the most Sigma day out in Leeds. No cap. What are you waiting for? The vibes are immaculate. Enjoy a goated day out. Slay.
Katie and Mark, really good to have you both on. And Katie, you're the genius behind this idea. And I'm wondering, how did you come up with it and how did you think Mark would react?
So I was actually away from work when this trend sort of started, and it was started by a B&B in Oxfordshire, actually. And I'd seen it was getting a little bit of traction, and I thought I need to get back to work. As soon as I come back from my holiday, I want to do this trend. So I started thinking up how we could tailor it to our collection and make it a bit more like historical. And Mark had been suggested to me by another colleague, and we thought absolutely he's got the perfect cadence in his voice for it. He's a very distinguished gentleman, so he's the perfect kind of foil to what we're trying to have him do. I really wasn't sure if Mark would be up for it or not. I'd hoped he would, but he was really enthusiastic, so that was always an added bonus.
That's it, Mark. I was going to ask what your initial reaction was to Katie's proposal.
Oh, I was actually very intrigued, and I thought this might be actually good fun, something I've never done before. And believe it or not, I was kind of looking forward to learning a new language.
It is. And I wonder if you had any hesitation or worries, Mark.
No, not really. No, I trust my colleagues.
Katie, what was it like working with Mark on the recording?
Oh, it was so much fun. Yeah, we did it on, I think it was a Friday morning, just before the museum opened, and it was just a laugh. He was actually amazing and did most of them in one take. But it was really fun behind the scenes, kind of explaining what the different things meant, choosing where we were going to film each shot. It only took us about, 20 minutes. And yeah, we enjoyed it a lot, both of us, I think.
I'm surprised.
From my perspective...
Go ahead, Mark.
Sorry, Riz. From my perspective, my problem was trying to understand the context in which these new words were being used. Because when you speak about something or describe something, you can usually understand what those words are referring to. So I was having to learn a contextualization, a context for these new phrases and words. This is the largest display of arms and armour since the 19th century. Very based. Chat, this diorama is sending me. Dioramas are lit.
Well, when I saw the video, I had to have kind of a little Google with me at the time just to make sure I understood as well. But it was fascinating to watch it the way you said it. Katie, tell me about the moment when you posted the video and what happened afterwards.
So it was actually slower. Like we have gone semi-viral before this video, and this was quite a slow start. We started on the Friday afternoon just with a few thousand, and then it took about 2 weeks before I was like, wow, this is really taking off. And that was around when the press in the UK started getting interested as well. The first million was brilliant because hitting 1 million views for us is great, it's viral. And now we're nearing 10 million. So it was just completely unheard of. Every time I opened the phone when I got onto my desk each morning and refreshed, it was thousands of new comments, which was the nicest part, reading all the comments, and the followers as well just shot up. It was absolutely crazy. It was so rewarding to see.
10 million, that's absolutely amazing. Katie, what were your expectations? And then afterwards, Mark, what were your own expectations and what you made of the response?
Well, my expectations were a few 100,000. That was what I kind of expected because we'd had a few videos do well before, like I said, and I knew that this was the perfect time to be posting. The trend was in its sort of peak, and I'd hoped that we'd hit maybe 500,000 views. When we hit 1 million, I was really happy. So it way surpassed my expectations, and I think Mark was...
For me, it was, this is new territory for me, the social media world. I had heard on the grapevine that the social media can be quite a dark place at times. So to discover both its popularity and, more importantly to me, I think, was how nice people were. That was quite a shock and revelation. And so that was really pleasing to hear.
It's nice to see that positive side, as you say. Mark, how have you been coping with your unexpected celebrity? How often have you been recognised in the streets or on public transport?
Katie and I were just talking about that before we came on air here. Yes, I do get recognised on the train when I'm commuting. I got recognised at my local supermarket by 2 of the cashiers who wanted selfies. Which is fine. I've got no problem with that at all. No, I just go with the flow, I think. it's the best way of putting it. People are generally quite nice.
And I think, Mark, that Katie's talked you into making a sequel. Are there future plans for more, or are you going to retire your vocabulary?
I'm not retiring the vocabulary, but Katie has some ideas.
Yeah, we've got, obviously we did a part 2 and we did a blooper reel, and we've actually got a meeting in I think it's about a week and a half, 2 weeks, where we're going to discuss some future ideas. Maybe keep your eyes peeled around Christmas time as well for something special. So lots in the pipeline.
Amazing. Katie, you know, museums are getting increasingly creative at presenting their exhibits, and some others remain a little more stuffy or traditional. So what can other museums learn from this approach that you've taken?
I think it's just about expanding your audience, and that was the goal here. Is museums have a traditional audience, but reaching Gen Z isn't always the norm. But TikTok being the Gen Z platform, it's such a nice way of connecting with that younger audience, and they are interested. And I think that's a real lesson from this video. As you look at the comments, we've had people saying that they're going to book a flight and come here just because of this video, and not just online, but we've had people come into the museum and say, oh, they're here because we saw the TikTok. So there's a real lesson to be learned that Gen Z are interested, and it's really important to connect with them, and by using their own trends is the perfect way of doing that.
That's wonderful. I was going to say, Mark, what has been the impact on the museum from your perspective? Have people been searching your website and looking to visit the museum a lot more, perhaps to see its now famous curator?
Well, there's part of that. Yes, that is true. But museums deal with material culture, 3D objects in the main, and to really appreciate them, you must come and look at them physically. Although the process of these sorts of videos, this sort of social media work, introduces people to what we have, and I think that's the most important hook. And yes, I sometimes walk around the galleries, and I find that quite interesting when people stop me and ask me a question, ones which I can usually answer because that's my world and that's my skill set. So yes, it's quite fun. I am enjoying my life at the minute.
Well, you know, when I moved from the UK to the US to take up a job there years ago, I thought I was in a world with a completely different language. You know, the same language, but on two sides of the Atlantic, it's very different. It seems that it's another world completely now with the Gen Z language that you've been using. Katie, how influential is social media in changing our language?
Oh, it's incredibly influential. Just in the past few years, things have changed so much from like the rise of Gen Z. In fact, you know, on the video, we claimed it was a Gen Z marketing script, but there are millennial terms in there as well. And people really got up in arms about that. And then there's also Gen Alpha terms, Sigma and Riz, for example, definitely more of the Gen Alpha side. So it's crazy to see how quickly language is changing online and how kind of defensive people are about their own generation and their different kind of words that they use. But it's all surrounding the internet, and TikTok in particular in the last kind of 3 or 4 years has really taken the kind of head as kind of the language changer, in my opinion.
Well, Mark, as you said, you're not retiring that vocabulary. Have you started using these words in everyday life?
Yes, I have, actually. I mean, I'm a baby boomer. Actually, I'm told I'm a baby boomer too. They split the baby boomers into two elements. So all the language, we didn't have social media back then, so the language is different. Yes, I'm enjoying trying to put this language into my everyday life, mostly because it's actually quite amusing, it's quite fun, and people seem to enjoy engaging with it. I've just got to remember what it all means.
Well, I was going to say, Mark, Gen Z is known for resurrecting trends and fashions from previous generations. Are there any favourite words you'd like to pass on from your generation? My generation too, actually.
Well, it's, you know, one of the ones we used to use a lot back then was the word cool, in terms of what it used to mean. You know, it's really, you know, that's a really neat thing. Now, that sort of word, you know, it's almost from the San Francisco period of flower power and all that fun stuff. That's the early years of my growing up. Of course, we only saw that on films and on the newsreels. There's no such thing as social media. It was all sort of by word of mouth. Now it's all on your phone, isn't it? That's where it all lives.
Well, you know what's cool, Mark, is that the word cool was exactly what came into my head when I had to think about what would be something from our generation, so to speak. Now, Katie, in respect to members of Gen Z, is it fair to say this kind of behaviour is perhaps not to be encouraged among parents, teachers, newscasters and talk show hosts in particular? Should we avoid trying to use these words?
Oh, I don't think so at all, no. I think it's just a bit of fun, really. I think it's more encouraging to see people from older generations getting involved with it, because a lot of the time there can be a bit of a divide between generations. Boomers not appreciating things from Gen Z and Gen Alpha, but I think what me and Mark are doing here is a really, really nice, fun collaboration between the generations, and it just shows that we can all get on and we can all use the same language, and it's all just fun. So I would encourage any generation to use any language at all.
Well, Mark,
can I ask you a question, Riz?
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, would you use any of this language?
Well, I have an 18-year-old, so I have sometimes to kind of translate certain things, but I struggle with it a bit because I went to a convent school in Aden. I was born in a British colony, and I had English beaten into me by nuns. So it's very hard for me to deviate. I never abbreviate text messages, for example, which is quite frustrating for some people, but I actually write everything out full, so it's hard for me. But I was going to ask you, Mark, if someone told you at the start of this year you'd become a social media star with millions of fans and a command of the Gen Z language, what would have been your reaction? Perhaps you can put it in terms that Gen Z would appreciate.
Well, that's a very good question. I've got to remember my phraseology now. Well, it would have been something which would have been amazing. Something I'm just struggling with the right word here to fit in.
I think you would have been shook.
I'll be shook. There you go. That's what I need. You see, Casey's really important to provide me with my appropriate vocabulary here. It's very shook. It was very shook. And I'm very slay about it.
That's slay. I was just going to say, it's the one word that stuck with me. Well, Katie and Mark, I have to, again, reiterate, my name is Riz with one Z, or Z as the Americans like to say. And Riz with two Zs, two Zs, was voted Word of the Year on this day a year ago. And you used a derivative word in your video, Rizzler.
Henry VIII is the original Rizzler. His codpiece hits different.
Now, I have to reveal something that I was given a year ago when that word Riz was the word of the year. It's a T-shirt with Riz on it. Now, I didn't even know there could be a derivative, but it seems that I'm being replaced by a new word now.
Well, no, what you need to get out your crayon and add the extra 3 letters now.
Yeah. So we decided to use Rizzler. Again, that's a Gen Alpha term, and it's a really silly way of saying someone has Riz. It's more of something to describe somebody. Someone is the Rizzler, and they have Riz. So if we're talking about Henry VIII being the Rizzler, it flows off the tongue better, really. But it's slightly less used than Riz.
I was the only kind of Riz around for so many years when I came out onto the media, in doing shows. And people nicknamed me Rizzler, which was quite funny, but it was after the cigarette wrapper, the papers. So it was Rizla, which was kind of strange. Still, it was good while it lasted. I look forward to seeing you in person when I get to Leeds to see the museum itself. And it was really good to have you both on. Thank you both, Katie and Mark.
It was a real pleasure. Thank you
very much.
Well, for this segment, I've gone into full Rizzler mode. We'll explain more as we get some further insights into how this subject came about with my colleague Matty Potter, our social media editor at Al Arabiya News. Matty, thanks. Look, it was about a year ago I started to get all these messages from my friends saying that I was the word of the year, according to the Oxford University Press. Where did this word Riz come from?
Well, it came about on social media 2 or 3 years ago. It really came about first. It's just a shortened version of charisma, the word charisma. Having some charisma, and it slowly kind of, through online trends, through big influencers popularizing the term, became a sort of general term for just having Riz, sort of just meant to how you move to a person on a night out. So trying to attract the other person you're trying to attract. So yeah, it kind of stemmed into that, and then it kind of spiraled. Obviously with TikTok, the post-COVID boom that came with TikTok really popularized these terms. And sort of grew that sort of community. I'd actually say now the word Riz has been overused a little bit, and it's sort of on its way out. Never, no, not you, Riz, of course not you. But its meaning kind of changes a lot, which kind of happens a lot on social media. You'll have a term that's used in a certain way, and it'll slowly adapt as more and more people speak about it and infer it in their own way.
So that's the next question. What happened? It's disappeared, and what happens to it when it kind of disappears?
So a lot of the time, everything's very fast-moving on social media. So terms come and go, especially with things like TikTok. It's kind of created a culture of, we call it fast food. So things come and go very quickly. Fast food terms, fast food trends. I mean, trends can last like a week or two. And now that everyone's sort of more and more comfortable sort of creating their own content or giving their own output and takes on things, a lot of things move on very quickly. So it will get overused, and then it's not cool anymore. It's not the trendy thing, because your mum might start using it, or your brother might start using it,
yeah.
And then it kind of comes into fashion, and new words come all the time. And as more and more people get online, younger, and the sort of average audiences becomes younger and younger, more and more terms are coming, and sort of different inferences are coming from it.
They want their own thing, I guess.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. So I've been replaced, or Riz has been replaced by, actually, at least that was a cool word, but the new one, just announced, is not so cool.
Yeah. Brain rot.
Brain rot. I mean, that's awful. Actually, I remember using that as a word years and years ago, so it seems to have come around again.
Yeah, definitely. It's had a sort of resurgence. It's sort of just a general bracket term for all of those online exclusive terms. Riz, you would argue, is technically a term of brain rot. So it's just online slang that's just, again, like the original term, it's rotting your brain. It comes with the sort of content. It's not just for the slang. It can be, people use brain rot for example, for a type of content that's just sort of fast food, meaningless humor that's not going to stick with you. You're just going to sort of have a quick, cheap laugh and just keep going. So, yeah, Riz is like an example of something. The word Riz is an example of brain rot, because you're slowly losing the English language, and you're using more and more slang of something that doesn't really even make sense.
I'm getting ready to change my name. I'm going to be associated with brain
rot Khan, I don't know.
Well, not to brain rot, that's for sure. I was going to say, though, it's interesting. So Gen Z has created its own language. You know, generations before had their own words as well. Every generation seems to want to have its own reference points, I guess. But then things move so fast, they seem to be getting even faster now.
Yeah. I mean, like I was saying earlier, like the social media boom, and with a lot more people becoming more comfortable creating content. The thing you need to understand about social media is, for a long time, especially in the 2010s, as social media kind of became popular as a sort of platform, a lot of it was very much, the average person was just a viewership. They wouldn't really post on it too much, wouldn't try and be creative with too many videos. So you had a few anomalies of big YouTubers or influencers. It was a lot rarer at the time. Whereas now it's a lot more popular. I think when COVID had hit, a lot of people had a lot more time, became a lot more creative, and started trying things, like trying to post things. So as you become more and more of a producer of the content, or a producer of opinions on Twitter, or a producer of really putting your voice out there and really creating itself, that then leads into sort of more and more people getting involved in sort of these trends and terms. So everything's kind of as spiraled and become a lot faster now.
Is it meant to be a code? I mean, I don't recall my generation, or even a couple of those after, ever thinking of it as a code, but now it seems to be almost incomprehensible.
Part of it is, it's very much like, the more in the loop you are, the more you'll understand, and it's quite a sort of distant idea. It's like learning it is kind of like a second language. It's like learning a second language. The more you sort of surround yourself in it, if I want to go and learn Spanish and I go into Spain, eventually I'm going to pick it up. It's the same sort of idea. You can pick terms and someone can explain to you a term, but a lot of the time, like if I try and teach my mum something, she might use it, but not in the right context. It doesn't make sense to us. So I don't think it's on purpose to try and be like, oh, so they don't understand. It's just the humor that comes with a silly new term that can explain it's usually something relatable, or a big topic that talks about online. So.
I know we work together and we're friends.
Yes.
But how would you feel if I suddenly started talking about things like slay, had all these words?
Me personally, I would find it funny. I would love that. As a social media person working on here, I would love if you did that. But there are people who might find it cringe. They might find it like, oh, you're a bit out of touch. But then again, there's a charm to it. I think how serious you take yourself, if it became part of your vocabulary every single day, people might throw questions and be like, oh, you should be a bit more professional, or you shouldn't use these certain terms, etc. But I think for me, it's always I think it's always fun, and I enjoy seeing people trying to use those sort of words, or getting themselves involved in popular culture and internet, because I think it's just a healthy way to...
My closest friends have been around since I was 11. I'm sure they would hate it.
Oh, yeah, I'm sure. I'm sure there's going to be people, and social media has created that aspect where it's very polarized. People can be very judgmental. They're either very accepting, or they might be like, why is he doing that? That's cringe. Why is he... Oh, I'm not going to use this term anymore because he said it. That happens a lot. And even with not necessarily like older generations, it could be people in your current generation that you might not like as a creator for whatever reason. And if they start to use some sort of certain vocabulary, a lot of the time people will go, I'm not using that anymore because he's saying it. So it's very much like, it's very much pick and choose who you let
That's
in,
another term, creator.
Creator, exactly, yeah.
You know, I was wondering how much like mainstream, like Hollywood and stuff, influences, at least helps create some of these words. This film, Wicked, that's come out, everyone's anticipating. We used to use the word wicked as kids. Oh, it's wicked.
Yeah.
Is that going to come back?
I don't want to overpromise, Riz. I don't want to break your heart. It very much can. I mean, a lot of words come around all the time. All it takes is just one sort of silly, funny joke online, a little stupid joke online to do with that term, and it can very much come back around again. There's not any rules where things can't be. It's how it comes about and if people take to it or not. It's very much a trial and error. Some people try and often like bring words to come back and it doesn't work. I think a lot of the reason people like certain terms when they come back is it comes back quite naturally. It's someone just using it in a term, like for example, Riz. Like that's a shortened version of the word charisma. That's all it was really meant to be. And then the meaning kind of changed and adapted as people used it themselves. So it's how people take to it. So never say never to Wicked. Maybe it might come back.
Do I have to burn this T-shirt?
I like Riz is still around. Riz is still around. I like the word Riz.
If it's associated with brain rot.
That's just any sort of internet slang term. It gets bracketed. People like to put things into sort of a box to understand it. So, yeah, I own.
You know, we talked about social media, the impact, because, of course, my generation, even for quite a while after that, there was no quick form of transport of content like there is now with social media. How much is social media changing language because it's able to fly around the world in microseconds?
It's changing at such a crazy pace. It's really hard to even delve into the depths of it because I'll give you an example. I have a friend who's learning a new language. He's learning English. So I went to university with him. English wasn't his first language. And a lot of the time, historically, people who were trying to learn the language, you'd watch TV shows, you'd be watching, I know people who've learned English by watching Friends, the TV show, right? And you sort of naturally, now the content online, that you're learning English but mixed with slang terms, and now people are learning the language whilst also learning these brain rot terms that sort of mix into it. So social media has become such a heavy form for people's consumption of content and things like that. So even just learning languages, it's affecting that way. So.
And I was curious where words come from. I mean, you know, there's obviously different communities. You have the LGBT community, you have the black community, Latino. Are these all sources for generating words?
Oh, definitely, for sure. I think a lot of slang terms that I might use growing up in London come from Afro-Caribbean sort of background and are built upon online over extended periods. I mean, before this sort of brain rot sort of language and these sort of things, a lot of the language is built off of like old slang from where I grew up in West London, in Notting Hill, where they had Notting Hill Carney. So there's a lot of like Caribbean influence in terms of our slang that we have in London. So it's kind of like a mix of all sort of English-speaking, mainly English-speaking languages. In terms of like American slang, you have slang that's from the South, you have slang that's from New York, you have Los Angeles. There's all these different places where these sort of terms come, and it's kind of like a melting pot online of all everyone's favourite terms from each one that they all accept, and it sort of grows naturally like that.
There's also this concept of verbing. I mean, in the old days, we would think Google is a name. It's actually the name of a company. But now we say, you have to Google it, or people are Googling and stuff. Yeah. That's become quite a big thing.
Yeah, that's a very popular thing. I think verbing, the use of verbing as a sort of slang term and sort of for language online, it helps with a lot of the time with content creation or explaining something in a relatable way. A popular one is mogging. I don't know if you know that one.
I've heard that word.
Yeah. So to mogging someone is just to basically be like, you kind of step on someone's shoes in terms of how you look. So you might be somewhere, and I've come and now I'm the star. So I've mogged you. I came into your presence and I stole your shine. That's a one way to term. So that's an example of a sort of a setup for funny humor online. So mogging someone is sort of like a humorous term. You're stepping on someone's shoes. So I think it just allows for content creators and sort of people online to make jokes easier whilst using the slang.
Life was simple for me. I mean, look, if I didn't understand a word, I went to a physical dictionary.
Yeah.
Or if it was another language, I went to a language dictionary, a Spanish dictionary, whatever. And then came Google Translate. But is there an app equivalent to Google Translate that would work with Gen Z, so an old fuddy-duddy like me would have a chance?
I think Googling certain terms usually is a good one. There's websites like Urban Dictionary that can help, but a lot of the time they have multiple.
But these are
meanings.
sources.
These are sources. Yeah.
But I'm wondering about an app where I can actually talk into it and it'll convert.
I guess that I wouldn't say there's one specifically. That might be a little gap in the market.
There you go.
But ChatGPT is usually pretty accurate at those sort of things. I mean, especially for those terms that are so popularized online, there's so much for it to analyze online because it's used so heavily. It's easier to translate, So.
All right, for the time that I am allowed to use some of these words, what would be a few good words for me to know?
Okay, so I just taught you mogging. That's one. I want you to keep using Riz because it's on brand. It's on brand. It's your name, so it makes sense. Riz with Riz.
What are your favourite words?
Obviously, because I work in social media, I try and stay in the loop as much as I can. So a lot of my vocabulary, if you ask my friends, words will come and go. There's not many that stick around for the long haul. I kind of like to play into the trends because as soon as it becomes more part of my vocabulary, I start to get it more and understand more content online. Riz is still one of mine. What are some that I use? So a lot of it's from like the slang I use from back home. It has Jamaican roots and sort of Caribbean, Afro-Caribbean roots. So we'll use a word called peng, which just means anything. It's just something that's like good or nice. It can be used for beauty. It can be used as sort of a really nice drink or food. Oh, this food is peng. That would be one word you can say.
P-E-N-G?
P-E-N-G, yeah. So it's just used to describe anything that's sort of like you enjoyed and it's nice to you. It originated from speaking about someone that you're attracted to. You would say, oh, they are peng. But then it's kind of, again, with online, molded into like describing like things you like, food, clothes, style, etc. And another popular one is aura. I don't know if aura. So if you have aura, it means you have like a good energy. You have
so I get that because I can understand it as a word.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Actually, that's probably an expression we would have used, years ago.
Exactly. So if someone has aura, it's someone who came in with a presence. It's like a presence that you really felt.
I could have Riz and aura.
Yeah, exactly.
The Riz aura.
Exactly.
So, one of the reasons we're talking about this is because of that, viral video from the Leeds Armouries Museum where the 65-year-old curator, Mark Murray Flutter, started to do this tour. Or he did this tour in Gen Z language. What did you make of that?
That was great. I loved it. That is a great example of embracing a younger audience and getting them involved in something that maybe they might not have. Museums can often be seen as, like, by the Gen Z as, boring. It's sort of like a generally aimed at you have an older audience normally at a museum. So to involve Gen Z language to explain, like, all the different things on display and what they have to offer there, I thought it was brilliant. And, really good. And it's good to see those sort of things work well when it is... It's honest. He clearly was into it and was interested by it. So.
He looked more comfortable in the second one. He was actually really enjoying it. The first one, he was quite nervous.
Yeah, he was a bit nervous. But those sort of things, when it's so natural like that, it resonates a lot more with the audience. People can see through if someone's trying to do it for a cause like that. They're trying to just get some views on a video. That was just like an actual, natural, like...
And I guess, we used to use the word cool. And when I spoke with him, he said cool was the word he would have used.
Yeah.
I mean, we're about similar age, so... but I'm guessing that even if it's not considered too cool for someone my age to be using these Gen Z words, I could have a go. So, 100%. So nevertheless, I've asked you to help me prepare a script to close the show, which could be understood by people under 27. I may live to regret this, but thanks for your time and advice, Matty, because I'm going to try this out and we'll see how it goes.
Can't wait.
All right, cheers. Thank you. Man, that episode just hit different, no cap. We spoke to a litty female band from Saudi with more aura than Duke Dennis, no glaze. Spotify put us on with some fire data about the Spotify Wrapped results. W Spotify in the chat. And we spoke to the low-key geniuses behind the bus in Brainrot Leeds Armoury vid. And finally, Matty Potter, who's just a chill guy who does our social media, teaches us NPCs, the do's and don'ts of speaking Gen Z. Bro thinks he's fluent. Well, that's enough yapping from me. Blood thinks it's a Kai Cenat Sabathon. Shout out the mafia. I've been the Riz Khan, and we'll see you soon.
That was great.
Did it work?
That was great. What have I created? What have I created? I created a monster.
Slay.
At Arabiya News, we go beyond the headlines.
From the latest breaking news to in-depth coverage of global events.
We're not bought or sold. Nobody owns us.
The loss of life, the destruction of property. The conflicts are such a terrible thing.
Context and analysis to help you see the full picture.
The world is in a very dangerous place.
Join us on Arabiya News.
It's very impressive.
Where knowledge meets perspective.
Hello and welcome to Global News Today, bringing you exclusive insights and fresh perspectives from leading experts and influential decision makers every weekday here on Arabiya News. I'm Tom Burges Watson, coming up on today's programme. Ukraine's Western allies appear to be focusing on diplomacy to prepare Ukraine for talks with President Putin. That's despite NATO warnings of his, quote, reckless actions. After seizing Aleppo, Syria's opposition forces are closing in on Hama in an unprecedented offensive against the Syrian government. Joining us in just a moment is Robert S. Ford, the former and last US ambassador to Damascus. And the US President Joe Biden's decision to grant his son a full pardon has triggered more reaction and more debate on the use of the pardon system. Hello and welcome to the programme. First, world leaders are weighing up whether the solution for Ukraine lies in more military aid or increased diplomacy with Russia. Well, speaking last night, the British Prime Minister Sir Keir Starmer said in a closely watched foreign policy speech that his goal was to, quote, put Ukraine in the strongest possible position for negotiations. Well, just last month, both Starmer and the French President Emmanuel Macron pledged to support Ukraine unwaveringly and for as long as was necessary to counter Russia. But that seems to have changed for now.
We must continue to back Ukraine and do what it takes to support their self-defence for as long as it takes, to put Ukraine in the strongest possible position for negotiations so that they can secure a just and lasting peace on their terms that guarantees their security, independence and the right to choose their future.
The British Prime Minister speaking there. Meanwhile, the Biden administration is rushing to send Ukraine another weapons aid package. That's despite concerns over depleting US stockpiles. And NATO's new Secretary-General Mark Rutte says that President Putin is ramping up his, quote, reckless actions in Ukraine and is therefore pushing Ukraine's allies to step up military aid.
Ukraine is entering another crucial winter, and Russia's aggression shows no sign of abating. Just the opposite. Putin is ramping up his rhetoric and reckless actions. He is using Ukraine as a testing ground for experimental missiles and is deploying North Korean soldiers in this illegal war. Putin is not interested in peace. He is pressing on, trying to take more territory, because he thinks he can break Ukraine's resolve and ours. But he is wrong.
The NATO Secretary-General speaking there. Well, NATO's foreign ministers are meeting in Brussels today to discuss the war in Ukraine and plans for future support. Well, for the latest, we can speak now to Michael Binyon, who is the Times of London's former foreign and Moscow correspondent and current editorial writer. Thank you so much for being with us. Let's start by talking about the discussions in Brussels and just listening as well to those clips before we cross to you. And there doesn't there, seem to be a realization amongst Ukraine's allies that a deal, some sort of a negotiated settlement, looks increasingly likely. Do you share that opinion?
Yes, I do. I think it's the war as it now is going on is unsustainable for Ukraine.
Sadly, they have lost a very large number of people. They're also having high desertion rates, and opinion polls within Ukraine have shown that more than half the population now thinks they would like to negotiate some sort of deal with the Russians. The key thing, of course, is a deal that is at least gives Ukraine a measure of its own independence and future, and isn't just a pure surrender to everything that Russia wants. And that is very difficult to achieve without considerable pressure on Russia, which means that Ukraine, for now, needs to be supported as much as it can, militarily and politically.
Yeah, and Ukraine once again calling for NATO membership and really appealing to those assembled in Brussels to give it to the country. He says it's the only real guarantee for its security going forward. I mean, do you think it's likely to get that membership anytime soon?
Well, actually, I don't know. I mean, I know that words were said at the last NATO meeting and encouraging phrases about, sometime in the future. But to be realistic, it seems very unlikely, partly because both Germany and the United States, key large NATO contributors, are opposed to the idea, and also because under NATO rules, you're not allowed to be a member of the alliance unless you control all your territory. And since Ukraine will not renounce any territory that the Russians continue to occupy, it won't have full control of its entire territory. Nevertheless, I think some sort of a security guarantee could be given to Ukraine without it actually being a full member of the alliance.
OK, we heard a clip of Mark Rutte just before we crossed to you. He said, amongst other things as well, quote, Putin is not interested in peace. He's pressing on, trying to take more territory because he thinks he can break Ukraine's territory and our resolve as well. I mean, do you buy into this argument of strengthening Kyiv ahead of negotiations? How would that work?
Well, it means giving Kyiv the weapons it needs, and very quickly. I mean, lots has been promised, but not enough delivered and not enough on time. So it does mean rushing things forward as fast as possible. But it's also true that Putin is trying to grab as much territory as possible, because the shape of a future deal, I mean, it's already clear to most people, and that is that the front line is frozen more or less where it is. There will be a ceasefire. I'm afraid there will be no peace deal because neither Ukraine nor Russia trust each other, and certainly no one trusts Putin. But if the conflict is frozen where it is, then Russia will be in a hurry to grab as much territory as possible. Obviously, the Ukrainians would have to withdraw from the Kursk area after their incursion there, but otherwise the lines will probably be frozen where they end up when the actual ceasefire comes into effect.
Yeah, I mean, we heard the United States is sending another $725 million worth of weaponry and military support to Ukraine, obviously angering Moscow even more, who says this is, again, pouring oil on the fire or fuel on the fire. I mean, how do you think Moscow envisions things unfolding?
Well, I think they see things actually moving more or less in their direction. I mean, their illusion that Trump would just give them anything on a plate, which they seem to have harbored for a while, I think will be shattered, because I don't think Trump will do that, certainly because his opponents in America are taunting him with the idea that if he just turns Ukraine over to the Russians, he would be scuttling out in the same way that Biden scuttled out of Afghanistan, which Trump criticized very strongly at the time. And I think there are resounding efforts from all parties, Europe, America's allies, the NATO Secretary General, and everyone else, to tell Mr. Trump that Ukraine is actually essential, arming Ukraine is essential for general Western defense in the face of aggression, because otherwise America will look weak and other allies will cease to rely on it and trust its word. So I think Mr. Trump will not be a pushover that the Russians had hoped. Nevertheless, they are in a strong position at the moment. They are moving forward fast. They have learnt a lot of military lessons that they clearly didn't know at the beginning of the campaign when they fought so badly. Things are going their way, and Ukraine is increasingly desperate, short of ammunition, short of men, and now I have to say, short of morale.
Yeah, and just picking up on one of the points you made there, I mean, just echoing one of your early points, the NATO Secretary General said that a bad deal ran the risk of emboldening China and North Korea. So, far-reaching implications of a bad deal if such a deal was struck in Ukraine. Do you get the sense that the incoming Trump administration is now beginning to realize this is a lot more complicated than it looked on the campaign trail and not the sort of situation that can be resolved in a short telephone conversation?
Well, I think actually being in power brings a sense of realism to any administration. And whatever they say in advance, the facts on the ground and the briefings they'll get, especially from the United States military and from senior intelligence officers, will make them understand that there is quite a lot to be done. You do need the initial conviction and push from the president himself, and he's determined to try to get this resolved, as much for his own glory as for the sake of Western solidarity and defense. But I think it will mean that it's not quite as simple as just ending it in 24 hours, which is what he said he would do on the campaign trail.
And Donald Trump has said in the last couple of days he's got a new Ukraine envoy as part of his lineup by the name of Keith Kellogg. I was just wondering whether you know anything about him and what you think he perhaps brings to the table.
Well, General Kellogg has had quite a long experience with dealing with Ukraine already, and he is already on top of the issue. I think he's got all the briefings, and he's been there and seen things and understands. He's met people from Ukraine. So I think he has the facts at his fingertips, which, of course, is essential if you want to plot the next move and do so quickly. So he's probably quite a good choice. He is pretty skeptical and has been publicly of Ukraine's ability to continue fighting. It may sound disheartening to the Ukrainians, but I think there is a sense of realism there. And however much the West should and ought and will, I think, support Ukraine, the fact is they're in a very difficult position at the moment, and that should be recognized.
Do you get the impression that if the new administration in Washington were to reduce support or pull the plug entirely in its support for Ukraine, where the European powers would step up to the plate and fill the void? Can they step up to the plate and fill the void?
Well, that's the big question, and that's the one that the Europeans have been privately discussing among themselves for 2 or 3 months now. Well, at least since Mr. Trump was elected. And the possibility of him being elected made them focus on that even before then. And yes, they would have to step up to the plate, certainly if the United States cut off all military aid and did so quickly. Then I think it would be extremely difficult for the Europeans to support Ukraine to the level that it made fighting a realistic possibility. The Europeans have given away most of the stuff that was on their shelves already. They have no spare ammunition, tanks, aircraft and other necessary things to just turn over to Ukraine without actually ramping up their production very quickly. Also, it would cost an enormous amount of money. And for all the goodwill there is in Europe, I don't think European public opinion is ready to pay the huge taxes that would be needed to raise the money for such an increase in defence spending.
Just before we crossed to you, we heard a clip of the British Prime Minister, Sir Keir Starmer, sounding extremely resolute in his support and British support for Ukraine. The United Kingdom sounding like it's been one of the most supportive countries to Ukraine since the beginning of the conflict. Do you think that Sir Keir Starmer is going to be able to win over Donald Trump and somehow exert some influence on him to sort of bring him into the fold of Ukraine supporters? How do you rate his chances?
Well, that's the big question for Starmer. In many areas, Ukraine especially, but in other areas as well, it looks as though that Labour, the Prime Minister and the present government, is being asked to choose between the European Union, where he wants to get closer, and the United States. And this is in a whole series of things like climate change, raising tariffs, all the other things that Mr. Trump has promised to do that may be cause of conflict with Europe. And how that Britain can actually keep a foot in both camps is going to be difficult. But clearly, I think Starmer wants to strengthen the alliance with America as much as possible and show solidarity in the hope of being able to influence Trump along the lines of what many Europeans would like to see, particularly over Ukraine.
And just lastly, I mean, going back to the situation on the battleground and really re-examining any eventual negotiations that we were talking about at the beginning. I mean, do you think it's fair to say that with each passing day, as we see, and as you've been saying, Ukraine's forces are struggling, notably on the Eastern Front. So we've got news today of more villages being captured by Russia in the southeast. Do you think it's fair to say that Ukraine's negotiating position is in fact getting weaker by the day as things currently stand?
It is indeed, and of course Putin knows that, and that's why Putin is in no hurry to make any deal, because he thinks that the Ukrainian resistance may collapse altogether if he holds on for long enough and sends wave after wave of more Russian soldiers. The problem for Ukraine is shortage of manpower. They have a much smaller population anyway. They've suffered a large number of casualties. We don't know the exact number, but very many. And there is increasing reluctance among young Ukrainians to serve in the army. There's been a high rate of desertion now. A lot of people are dodging the draft. And without full commitment by everyone, it's getting difficult. And of course, the other problem is people are increasingly reluctant to serve on the front if they think they've not got the right air cover to protect them. And at the moment, they don't have that. They don't have the weapons they need to stop these much more efficient Russian drone and missile attacks and the sheer weight of numbers that Russia is throwing against them.
OK, well, we're going to have to leave it there. We're out of time. But thank you very much indeed. We really appreciate you speaking to us. Michael Binion, thank you.
OK, thanks a lot.
Meanwhile, the Ukrainian foreign minister is calling on NATO allies to send at least 20 more air defense systems to stave off Russian attacks. This following on from the recent strikes on Ukraine's energy infrastructure. Well, let's get some more analysis now from Sir Gerald Howarth, who is the former British Defence Minister. Sir Gerald, thank you very much indeed for speaking to us. The British Prime Minister, Sir Keir Starmer, gave an important speech on foreign affairs at the Lord Mayor's annual banquet in London. We heard a clip of it before we crossed to you. The UK, he says, is going to continue backing Ukraine for as long as it takes. I mean, do you get the impression that the UK has done enough?
No, I don't think the UK has done enough, but then the UK has done far more than virtually every other country, except belatedly, of course, in the case of the United States, where President Biden, pressed by Prime Minister Boris Johnson, did eventually take action. But all his actions have been wrung out of him after pressure, a bit here and a bit there, and it's all, I'm afraid, in my view, too late. But the United Kingdom has played an important role, and in fairness to the current government, I think that Prime Minister Sir Keir Starmer has been uncompromising in his assertion that the United Kingdom stands foursquare with Ukraine, but under no circumstances should we or anybody else tell Ukraine to give up their sovereign territory to Russia as a result of its brutal invasion. That would be reprehensible, in my view, not least because we are signatories to the Budapest Memorandum, signed 29 years ago this week by the President of Russia, the Prime Minister of the United Kingdom, the President of the United States, under which we agreed to respect the sovereignty, independence and existing borders of Ukraine in return for Ukraine giving up its entire arsenal of nuclear weapons. So Russia is in flagrant breach of an agreement itself signed.
I want to come back to you on the Budapest Memorandum in just a moment, but I want to pick up on something else you were saying at the beginning there about how a lot of the weaponry that has been given to Ukraine, a lot of the assistance that's been given to Ukraine has come rather late in the day. And I'd just like to ask for your thoughts on that. Why don't you think it was given earlier?
Oh, it's perfectly clear. It was not given earlier because of a fear of escalation. We were too timid, in my view. I thought right at the outset that we should do absolutely everything possible, throw as much weaponry in support of Ukraine as we possibly could. It frustrated me that the Germans weren't prepared to send tanks, the Americans weren't prepared to allow F-15s to go to Ukraine. And it was all just too little, too late. And Putin could see that and has taken advantage of it. When all those tanks were lined up outside Kyiv, when they were stuck in the mud, I must say at the time I thought, well, the answer is just zap the whole lot of them and send them back to Russia. But this fear of escalation has dogged us all the way through. And Putin's played upon it.
Indeed, that's something we've heard a lot from our Ukraine guests, the psychological dynamic to this warfare. Do you think with the benefit of hindsight, you'd say that there should have been boots on the ground? Ukraine's allies should have sent in soldiers?
Well, I did suggest that right at the outset. So in my case, I would argue it was not with the benefit of hindsight, is what I thought at the time we needed to do. But it was clearly going to be a very, very tricky, potentially very dangerous move to have made by the United Kingdom and our allies. So we certainly couldn't have done it on our own. But belatedly, everybody now is saying that Russia must not be allowed to succeed. Now, if they'd said that right at the outset, taken action immediately, imposed all the sanctions immediately, cut off the oil supply, and delivered the weapons, it might have been a different story. But dribbling out support as we have done over the past 2.5 years has not been in our best interest. But even now, if we can supply the equipment that President Zelensky has asked for, we should do so. Meanwhile, we need to ramp up our own military production in the United Kingdom, across NATO, and in the United States too.
So just to pick up on what you've been saying, Sir Gerald, you'd sort of put this reluctance in the early days down to one thing, notably fear.
Yes, it was fear that it would cause escalation and that Russia would do goodness knows what. And all we have seen is escalation, but escalation by Russia. And now we have Putin saying that Biden is prolonging the war. Hold on, Mr. Putin. You didn't say this was a war. You said this was a special military operation. You are a liar. You are also arraigned before the International Criminal Court. There is a warrant out for your arrest. You have been abducting children, apparently in your own presidential aeroplanes, from Ukraine to Russia to Russify them. You are a rogue state, and you need to be dealt with as rogue states need to be dealt with. And very significantly, we've just heard this morning from the new Secretary General of NATO, Mark Rutte, former Prime Minister of the Netherlands, who said that Russia and China have tried to destabilize nations with acts of sabotage, cyber attacks, disinformation, and blackmail to intimidate us. I mean, it doesn't get much worse than that. Russia, China, North Korea, Iran, these are disturbing the entire world order. And we need to understand that unless we nip this in the bud, we are going to be back to where we were in the 1930s. And this is a very, very serious risk. And constantly being concerned, oh, we mustn't escalate. It is our failure. It is our fear of escalation by us that has resulted in the escalation by Russia of their unacceptable, disgusting brutality. And we simply have to stop it. If we do not stop it, imagine what the consequences will be. Who will be next? Because make no mistake about it, if Russia is allowed to keep some of the land that they have bombarded and stolen, whose people they have destroyed, whose buildings they have destroyed, do not imagine they are going to stop there. And you've heard today that the Kremlin has said that if NATO agrees to allow Ukraine to cede land to Russia and maintain and join NATO for what remains of Ukraine, the Kremlin would not accept that. These are nasty, nasty, brutal people, and they are liars. Their word cannot be trusted.
And yet, Sir Gerald, the British Prime Minister seems to be conceding to the fact that there should be and there will be a negotiated end to this conflict. Should Ukraine's allies, in your opinion, sit down at the negotiating table and negotiate with Vladimir Putin, given what you've just said about him?
Absolutely no way whatsoever. As I said right at the outset, the only people who are authorized, who have the right to cede part of their sovereign territory to another state are the people of Ukraine. If that is to happen, it must be a decision for them, and it is not our business either to advise them so to do, let alone to negotiate on their behalf with a brutal, repressive regime like that which operates in Moscow.
I just wanted to pick up on something you said about the Budapest Memorandum, because some of our viewers might not remember the significance of it. As you say, it's a nearly 30-year-old agreement, and it was intended, correct me if I'm wrong, to protect Ukraine in precisely the type of situation in which Ukraine finds itself today. Do you think, therefore, that this agreement is dead in the water?
Oh, clearly it's been dead in the water since the 22nd of February 2022, when Putin launched his brutal invasion of Ukraine. His forebear, his predecessor, Boris Yeltsin, was a signatory to that agreement. Therefore, Russia was bound by that agreement, as were the United Kingdom, the United States, and Ukraine. And it's a very simple question. Would Russia have invaded Ukraine had it still had the nuclear weapons which it gave up in response to the Budapest Memorandum? Of course not. Any more than Russia is going to attack the United States or attack the United Kingdom, because we have nuclear weapons. We have the targeting arrangements on Russia, and therefore we would retaliate immediately if they were to launch any kind of nuclear strike on any of us. So that's why Putin is not going to do it. So the Budapest Memorandum, of course, is rather important for your viewers. You're absolutely right. Your viewers do need to understand that it wasn't a guarantee of the security of Ukraine by Russia, Britain, and the United States. It was an agreement to respect the sovereignty, independence, and existing borders. And how you interpret that word respect, of course, is challenging. The agreement does, it's only a page and a half long, does provide for any disputes to be referred to the United Nations, but we've seen that that's been completely worthless. So it brings us back to, well, what did we mean by respect in this regard? And I have discussed it with former Prime Minister John Major when I was chairman of the all-party Ukraine group in the United Kingdom Parliament. And I don't think that he had any clear idea, any more than I do, as to exactly what respect means. But in my personal view, it was very clear that in exchange for giving up all those nuclear weapons, and they were about the third largest arsenal in the world of such horrendous weapons, we, the signatories, Russia, United States, the United Kingdom, agreed that Ukraine was a sovereign country, that its borders should be respected, and that's all been breached. And therefore, the United Nations being useless at doing anything about it, we are trying to do something about it. And I think that if, I repeat, we should be under no illusions whatever. If Putin is allowed to keep the land that he has stolen, he will regard that as a victory, albeit not the victory intended, because he intended to take the whole of Ukraine. He will still regard it and proclaim it as a victory. And then he will be emboldened to take action elsewhere. And we will be faced with a similar problem. And we will say to ourselves, oh, we mustn't escalate. And the man who will escalate will be Russia, will be Putin.
So
serious times, and I hope your viewers out there in the Gulf do understand just how serious it is for them as well, because if Russia, as a rogue state, is emboldened, so will Iran be emboldened, although Iran has been seriously damaged by Israel and by the failure of its proxies, Hamas, Hezbollah, and the Houthis, to destroy Israel. Nevertheless, do understand that they will be emboldened if Russia succeeds.
Given what you were just saying about the Budapest memorandum, given what you've said about the weaponry coming so late in the day and the hesitancy that we've seen from Ukraine's allies, you paint the picture that really Ukraine has been let down quite badly by its Western allies. Is that a correct assessment of what your take is on the situation?
Yes, I suppose the simple answer has to be yes, albeit that I do think that the whole of the West eventually came round to understanding the importance of supporting Ukraine, and to a greater or lesser extent, sovereign nations, particularly NATO members, have come to their aid. We've also, of course, provided refuge for many displaced Ukrainians who have fled the country. So I don't want to be overcritical, but this is politics, and I do want politicians to understand that if you appease an aggressor, you pay a big price. We have effectively appeased Moscow, and we are paying the price, and the Ukrainians are paying a very high price indeed. And I just feel that we should have acted more boldly and more quickly. I do salute Boris Johnson, who, in my view, took the lead on this, and without whose leadership we certainly wouldn't have had the Americans coming in and support. And I do find it astonishing that Republicans, I'm a conservative, I'm a Republican in American terms, I find it very depressing that our Republican friends have been so negative towards Ukraine, and so completely failing to understand the international ramifications of their failure to support what President Biden ultimately began to do in the way of practical hardware support to Ukraine. I've expressed this view to some of my friends in Washington, one of whom said that generally need to understand they're just ignorant. And I do think that there is an element of isolationism in America. They go through periods of isolation from time to time. And there will be Americans who do not see Ukraine as being part of their business, as indeed there are people in the United Kingdom who take that view. But we come back to the Budapest Memorandum. Both the United States and the United Kingdom are signatories. And I believe that having signed that agreement, we have a duty to do whatever we can to support Ukraine. And frankly, the sooner Ukraine is in a position to join NATO, the better the security of Europe will be, because NATO threatens nobody. NATO is a defensive organization. Russia is not defensive. Russia is an offensive organization, which is why two hugely long-standing nations, which have been long-standing neutral nations, Finland and Sweden, just last year applied to join NATO because they too felt threatened by their neighbour, Russia.
Yeah, of course, talks are happening in Brussels today. The NATO allies are assembled there talking about the situation in Ukraine, and perhaps not resolute in their opinion and not speaking with one voice in terms of having Ukraine join the fold just yet. But just lastly, this is my last question to you. I just want to ask you, going back to where we started, talking about Sir Keir Starmer and what he was saying last night, and picking up on what you were saying about Donald Trump's incoming administration and Republican hesitancy towards Ukraine. How do you rate Sir Keir Starmer's chances of lobbying, whispering to Donald Trump and trying to bring him around to his way of thinking, many European nations' way of thinking on the subject of Ukraine? Do you think he'll succeed?
I genuinely don't know. One of the interesting things about Donald Trump is that one never knows quite what he's going to do next. And one imagines that actually he doesn't know what he's going to do next. But I do remember in 2016 being very concerned about his rhetoric about NATO and possible US withdrawal from NATO. And I bumped into the Prime Minister in the lobby of the House of Commons whilst we were voting on something. And she was just about to go to America to meet the new President Trump, the first overseas leader to see him. And I said to Theresa May, Prime Minister, when you go to Washington, please make it absolutely clear to President Trump that NATO is not just in the interests of the security of Europe, but it's also in the interests of the security of the United States. And Prime Minister May smiled at me and said, Gerald, I've already done it. And we saw that, in fact, he rode back from some of his rhetoric on NATO, that the United States remained a key member of NATO. But there was one change of significance resulting from Donald Trump's election as president, and that was that a number of European countries, members of NATO, stepped up their spending on defense, something that not just President Trump, but Prime Minister Cameron, when he was Prime Minister here, also called on those nations which were not spending 2% of GDP on defense should do. And that was a very positive result of the first Donald Trump presidency. And I like to think that he is a pragmatist. And when he takes office and receives the latest intelligence briefing from US intelligence people, that he will recognize that Russia is not an ally, is not a threat, is a threat, cannot be trusted, and therefore the United States must be bold. Whether it will happen or not, that remains to be seen.
All right. Well, thank you very much indeed for taking the time to speak to us. We really appreciate it. The former British Defence Minister, Sir Gerald Howarth. Thank you.
My pleasure.
Now, turning our attention to the situation in Syria. And after snatching Aleppo from the Syrian government, Syria's opposition forces are now approaching Hama in central Syria, seizing at least 20 towns and villages around the city during the course of the last few hours. Well, Hama is a strategic city that links Aleppo to the capital Damascus, and the province's western countryside is home to many Bashar al-Assad loyalists. Well, for more analysis, we can speak now to Robert S. Ford, the former and last US ambassador to Syria. Ambassador Ford, thank you very much indeed for speaking to us. The situation in Syria, I think it's fair to say, hasn't changed very much over the course of the last decade. That is until now, this sudden resurgence of violence. It seems to have taken a lot of people by surprise. Did you see it coming?
No, I did not see it coming, and I know very few analysts or policymakers who anticipated this offensive.
What do you think is the thinking and the calculation with regards to timing that's been taken by these anti-government forces? What's your take?
I think the Syrian armed opposition forces sensed that the Lebanese Hezbollah positions and those of allied Iranian militias who had been fighting the Syrian armed opposition, they sensed that those Hezbollah and Iranian-backed militias were weaker after the fighting in Lebanon and after a fairly steady series of Israeli Air Force attacks on their positions up in north-central Syria.
Okay, and we've had reaction from right across the world to the situation. But I just wanted to pick up on something said by Andrew Tabler, who's a senior advisor on Syria during the last Trump administration. He's now at the Washington Institute. He said the Biden administration didn't just put Syria on the back burner, they took it off the stove. You can take things off the stove all you want, but that doesn't mean they're not going to boil over. Do you agree with that assessment?
The Biden administration has not paid much attention to Syria. That is very true, although the Biden administration did leave about 1,000 American soldiers in eastern Syria, ostensibly on a mission to fight against the remnants of the Islamic State that are still present in eastern Syria. But I also have to say I differ a little bit with my friend Andrew in that I don't believe the United States can fix the Syrian crisis. I don't believe the United States by itself has the key to resolving the Syrian civil war.
Okay, they might not be able to fix it, but do you think Washington has got a preferred outcome here? And if so, what do you think it is?
I think in an ideal world, what Washington would like to see is a new government in Damascus that's moderate, that's probably a coalition of different elements of Syrian society, different Syrian communities, Kurds, Muslims, different sects and different ethnic groups. Syria is a mosaic, but Washington has no strategy for how to achieve that.
Indeed, and when you look at previous situations where there's been a change of administration in a country at the will of the West, it hasn't always worked out too well, thinking of Iraq in particular. I mean, do you think there is, for that very reason, a good deal of hesitancy about what to do next?
I think both the Trump administration before Biden and now Biden, and even going back to my time with Barack Obama's administration, the bad experiences from Iraq, from Libya, and from Afghanistan have made Washington much more reticent to involve itself in civil wars in that part of the world, and I actually think that's a good thing.
There are some analysts talking now about an eventual negotiated solution in Syria. And I just wonder what your take is on that and what you think there is to negotiate.
I don't think there'll be a negotiated solution to the Syrian civil war anytime soon. I have seen no evidence over the last 13 years of President al-Assad's government being willing to make any political compromises, any political concessions, zero. And on the other side, the Syrian armed opposition, and in particular this group spearheading the offensive south towards Damascus, it's called HTS, I sense very little flexibility from them either. So we're more likely to see some kind of a ceasefire develop over the next couple of weeks to replace the ceasefire that was established in 2020. So perhaps by the end of the year, a new ceasefire with new ceasefire lines farther south than the 2020 ceasefire line.
But I mean, the situation is evolving extremely fast, has been for the last few days, and I'm sure you're following it very closely. So what is your understanding of just what the situation is right now on the ground in Syria?
I think the Syrian armed opposition, which in the entire history of the Syrian civil war has never been united, and it's not united now in late 2024. So one part of the Syrian armed opposition, backed by Turkey, is actually moving most of its forces east to capture territory from Syrian Kurdish militias, and in particular one Syrian Kurdish militia, which in the past has helped the United States against the Islamic State. The other part of the Syrian armed opposition, led by the group I mentioned, HTS, is not driving east, it's driving south in the general direction of the capital, and has now established outposts, front lines, near the Syrian city of Hama, which is about 130 kilometers south of Syria's second largest city, Aleppo, the city that fell over the weekend.
Okay, so just for the benefit of our viewers, we've got a map I think we can bring up to show them. You've got Aleppo up there in the north. Hama is underneath that. Below that is Homs, and below that is the capital, Damascus. And just looking at that rapid progression from Aleppo to Hama, one of the other largest cities in the country, how vulnerable do you think this is all making the Syrian government look at this particular stage?
Well, definitely they look weak and they look vulnerable, but I would remind viewers of two things. Number one, the Syrian opposition, the armed opposition, is not united, as I said before, and the part of the armed opposition that is driving towards Hama and then Homs and then Damascus is not that big. It probably doesn't have more than 30 or 40,000 fighters. So I think well before they get near Damascus, if they even get past Hama. But if they were to really threaten Bashar al-Assad's hold on Damascus and probably even Homs, I think the Russians would scrape together some special operations forces, and the Iranians will assemble a force of militias from Iraq, from Afghanistan, from Pakistan, and flow them in to the battlefront to hold the battle line so that Assad's control over Damascus, in particular, and probably Homs, remains secure.
Yeah, you mentioned those Iraqi fighters that are helping the Syrian government. I mean, just give us a sense of who's on the battlefield that we should be looking out for. Anything striking about who's there, and perhaps more interestingly, who's not there at this stage?
Well, what strikes me as particularly interesting right now is that the Russian Air Force, which really helped turn the tide the last time Bashar al-Assad's defensive lines were crumbling. Now, that was back in 2015, 9 years ago. The Russians surged in about 36 aircraft and operated a very heavy operational set of airstrikes, sometimes 30 or 40 a day, to stop the armed opposition advance back then in 2015. The Russian Air Force is not undertaking the same level of air operations now, and I think they have some fewer aircraft, and they certainly don't have as many men on the ground either. The Iranian-backed Hezbollah from Lebanon was fighting in 2015 and also has really been a key ally on the ground for Syria's Bashar al-Assad, but they were bloodied badly in Lebanon. And so they're really not in strength like they were, say, 5, 6, 9 years ago. And so that's why you've seen Assad's forces have to fall back, plus the element of surprise, and I think they were caught by surprise.
Just looking at the new administration in Washington coming to power in less than 2 months from now, one of Donald Trump's nominees is the intelligence chief designate Tulsi Gabbard. And in the past, just reading between the lines, she sounded somewhat sympathetic to President Bashar al-Assad. I don't know if you agree with that, and what you think that perhaps indicates to us about what the next administration might have planned or might have by way of desired outcome in Syria.
Well, first, it's too early to know. And second, the final decisions on especially American military involvement will go to Donald Trump. But I think useful for viewers to understand is that the Donald Trump administration will actually be composed of two different camps. There's a camp that really does not want to get involved in Syria, wants to get American military forces out of large parts of the Middle East. I wouldn't call them isolationists, but they certainly want the United States to exercise great restraint. And Tulsi Gabbard, whom you just mentioned, would fall in that camp. She will be working in the intelligence community if confirmed by the American Senate. Then you have a different camp, which is a more conservative foreign policy group that wants to resist Iranian influence in the Middle East, wants to reduce Iranian influence in the Middle East, and thinks that the United States needs to do more against Iran in places like Syria and Iraq. How Donald Trump comes out between these two camps is the key question. The only thing I know for certain is that Donald Trump wanted to withdraw completely from Syria in 2019, and Pentagon generals and State Department diplomats talked him out of it. But at the time, he called Syria nothing but a land of sand and death. I don't know if he's changed his mind.
Okay, and obviously, this is the last question to you. I mean, do you think that one way or another we're looking at perhaps the beginnings of the end of what has been a 13-year-long conflict in Syria, or do you think we're perhaps looking at the beginning of a whole new chapter? What's your hunch?
My sense is that we will get another ceasefire probably in the next several weeks. And so it's difficult to say that Bashar al-Assad's government is going to fall or that he is going to leave power. That I do not see in the cards, and I think the Russians and the Iranians will do what it takes to keep him there. But the Syrian government and the Syrian state institutions, including the military, are steadily eroding and becoming weaker. There's a dynamic there, which I don't think the Russians and the Iranians can control. But what comes after Assad, that's also very opaque. And remember, there is no united Syrian opposition leadership, and that does not portend for a simple transfer of power.
Okay, well, thank you very much indeed for your time today. Ambassador Robert S. Ford, thank you for speaking to Al Arabiya News.
Thank you.
Well, for more analysis, we can speak now to Mick Mulroy, who is the former US Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense for the Middle East and the Pentagon's former top policy official for the Middle East, who joins us now from Montana in the US. Thank you very much indeed for speaking to us, sir. Just before we crossed you, we spoke to the last US ambassador to Damascus, Ambassador Ford, and we asked him whether this sudden resurgence of violence had taken him by surprise, whether he'd seen it coming. He said he hadn't seen it coming. Had you?
It's good to be with you, Tom, and your audience. I think that's fair with most people that even follow this very closely. They didn't expect this level of collapse of the regime at the hands of the rebels. Looking back, hindsight gives you perfect vision, but there was some indicators that it could, and that is, of course, that the Assad regime is propped up by the Russians, the Iranians, and then in large part from troops on the ground, Hezbollah, all of which are involved in their own conflict. And Hezbollah has actually pulled a lot of their forces back from places like Aleppo and throughout the Idlib province because of the Israeli invasion into southern Lebanon. So in hindsight, it does look like this could have happened, but I do think it caught most people, even analysts that follow this area, by surprise.
Okay, so I'm sure, like lots of other people in the United States, you are keeping a close eye on the situation in Syria. What do you think Washington's desired outcome is in this situation?
So it is very difficult. So in the past, we've had a policy of regime change. That was obviously changed. It is important to point out the Assad regime is responsible for hundreds of thousands of civilian deaths in this civil war. But there's also an issue of stability and who would take over in the event, which I still think is unlikely, that there is a complete collapse of the regime. This is, of course, multiple different groups, HTS leading the way. That essentially came from an al-Qaeda-linked group, al-Nusra, the leadership. They've pulled a bit away from that ideology, but certainly is somewhat extreme. And a lot of these groups are supported by Turkey. I don't know that Turkey would have really wanted this to happen in the way it did, because it could also cause major influxes of refugees into Turkey. So I think the countries are all going to get together and try to determine what is the best outcome from the region, hopefully. And hopefully Assad, if that is, that he remains at the current time, is willing to negotiate with all the groups going forward. If not, then he's really going to have to rely on Russia fully committing to regime preservation in Syria.
Okay, so do you think it's looking more likely that we're heading down the route of further military action and a raising of the temperature in terms of the situation on the battlefield? Or do you think it's more likely we'll go down that other road that you just alluded to there, some sort of a negotiated settlement?
Well, I think, one of the issues is if this rebel group continues to push and doesn't have a lot of resistance, then, of course, they'll have less, I think, desire to enter some kind of negotiations. I mean, it's just how things work, particularly in that country at this time. So if Assad can't put up at least somewhat of a resistance to stalemate this successfully, then that makes the negotiations less likely. So we'll have to see in the coming days just what happens, whether Russia will fully come in, whether Hezbollah will redeploy forces to assist them, and of course, whether Iran will get more involved. A positive, of course, when it comes to the anti-Iran crowd is if Assad is removed, then that Shia corridor, as they called it, that can ship weapons into Hezbollah is compromised. But again, it's unclear of what would happen if the Assad regime is thrown out.
And what do you think we might see by way of a shift in approach towards Damascus with the incoming administration in Washington? Of course, I'm talking about Donald Trump's return to the White House.
Well, that is a good question, because they have been, I would say, if on comparison to the Biden administration, the past Trump administration was very strong against Iran. And that's likely going to continue, as Iran has caused so much of the issues going on in the Middle East. They are getting closer to a nuclear weapon. And of course, there's media reports that they've even had plots to kill the incoming president. So if you look at it that way, in Assad being somewhat of a client state of Iran, then this could be bad or good for the anti-Assad forces. I do think that, of course, ultimately, foreign policy has to deal with pragmatism as well. They have to determine just what would replace him if something in this coalition would be the case, and then would that be better for our interests and the interests of the region? So there's a lot of unknown questions right now, but I do think the incoming Trump administration would be even more hard on Iran than the current Biden administration is.
The ambassador we were just speaking to, Robert Ford, the last US ambassador to Damascus. Do you think it's right that the United States decided to pull out its diplomatic presence from Damascus? Or do you think they should have perhaps thought more recently about perhaps reinstating a diplomatic presence in the form of an ambassador, as some countries have started doing? And the most notable example I can think of is Italy, which has decided in the last couple of years to reinstate an ambassador to Damascus. What do you think the United States should have done?
So this is a tough call. I mean, we talked already a bit about just how brutal this regime of Bashar al-Assad is. And we did, of course, had a regime change policy. Of course, the United States does have ways to have diplomatic relations with them through partner countries and even through the intelligence services at times. I do think it's something that has to be constantly assessed to determine whether it is still in our interest not to have direct contact. That's shifting the diplomacy from, again, third parties, third countries, or the intelligence service to an official relationship. But that would probably have to be also somewhat of an acknowledgement that this regime is going to say. So that decision now from the incoming administration will have to be looked at from those regards.
Okay, and just lastly, I put the same question to Ambassador Ford. I'd just like to ask for your thoughts, your predictions. I know it's very difficult to predict where things are heading, especially in a situation that's moving as fast as this one and that took everyone, as we've been saying, by surprise. But what do you think is the likely next stage, and what sort of an end game might we be looking at here?
I look very closely at Turkey. Most of the support that goes to these rebel groups comes through Turkey, and they can cut it off. And if they, and I do believe that they think this is destabilizing, as it could shove millions more people into Turkey, then they can have a lot of leverage on HTS and the other groups. They can simply say, we'll cut you off. So if that is the case, I do think this will end with some kind of negotiated, say, diplomatic way ahead. It'll still be tense, but this is something that happens when you have groups that are solely reliable on third countries like Turkey and this rebel group. So I do think this will stop before there's a full regime change in Damascus.
All right. Well, thank you very much, indeed. We're going to have to leave it there. Mick Mulroy, thank you for speaking to us on Al Arabiya News. Now, in other news, already reeling from their November election defeat, the US Democratic Party is now grappling with President Joe Biden's decision to pardon his son, Hunter, for federal crimes. Well, some have called the move misguided and unwise. Others have gone further, saying it sets a dangerous precedent. Well, the incoming president, Donald Trump, has said that he is considering pardoning the rioters who attacked the Capitol on the 6th of January 3 years ago. Well, for more analysis, we're joined now by Richard Painter, former chief White House ethics lawyer in the administration of George W. Bush, who joins us now from St. Paul, Minnesota. Thank you very much indeed for joining us. In your opinion, was this the wrong decision by President Biden?
I do not fault President Biden for wanting to pardon his own son. The president has the power under the U.S. Constitution to pardon anybody. and this is fully understandable. What I strongly disagree with is President Biden's statement that he issued yesterday saying that the prosecution was unfair and was politically motivated. This was a prosecution undertaken by an independent prosecutor appointed by the United States Department of Justice, which has been supervised for 4 years by Attorney General Merrick Garland, who was appointed by President Biden himself. And we've had multiple prosecutions of high-profile figures, not just Hunter Biden, but of course President-elect Trump, in 2 cases brought by the Department of Justice. And President-elect Trump is saying that those prosecutions were politically motivated, which I also do not think is true. It does not help for President Biden to be undermining his own Justice Department and the independent prosecutors who've been appointed pursuant to the Department of Justice regulations. Hunter Biden was duly convicted of crimes. These are not heinous crimes, crimes that probably wouldn't result in jail time. I fully understand the pardon of his own son, but the attacks on the Department of Justice are not justified and will encourage more attacks next year by the incoming administration, attacks against career prosecutors, political attacks, and I just don't think that's appropriate.
Yeah, of course, President Biden pledged that he wasn't going to do this, and then he changed his mind. And I'm just wondering what you think has got people so angry, because let's be clear, this story isn't going away. People are furious about this in the United States. Do you think people are angriest about the fact that President Biden went back on a promise, or do you think they're angriest about the fact that he's decided to pardon his own son?
Well, presidents make campaign promises and then break those promises over and over again. I don't think this was a credible campaign promise. I never believed it. I wish the Biden White House had not kept repeating it. They simply should have said no comment on the Hunter Biden case, and that would have been good enough. So I wish they hadn't been talking about it so much. But yes, presidents do break campaign promises, and clearly President Biden did this here. But he's trying to explain his way out of that by attacking the prosecution, attacking the Justice Department, and the integrity of the independent counsel was a serious mistake. The claims the president is making about the independent counsel are not accurate, and this just feeds the flames of animosity toward the Justice Department from the political right. And those claims, of course, those allegations will accelerate when Donald Trump takes office. We need an independent Department of Justice where the president is not pressuring the Department of Justice, where the president is not attacking prosecutors, tweeting at prosecutors, that type of thing. We saw it in the first Trump term, and I'm very disappointed that President Biden has used a little bit of the same playbook involving the case, the Hunter Biden case. I wish he'd just simply issued the pardon, no comment, move on.
Yeah, the New York Times has got an argument as to why he changed his mind, and I wonder whether you could help me understand it. They say that the ongoing pressure of these legal trials could have some impact on Hunter Biden's mental well-being, his sobriety. I mean, do you think there's much sympathy in the American public for the situation the president found himself in and this risk, according to the New York Times, that his son's health could deteriorate as a result?
Well, I believe there's some sympathy. His son, Hunter, has had serious issues with substance abuse and other issues over many decades. And once again, I think that everyone would understand why a father who has the power to pardon a son in this situation would do it. But as the Biden administration digs in explaining why the president did it, the explanations that attack the integrity of the prosecution team, the integrity of the Department of Justice, are very, very dangerous, particularly with the incoming administration being supported by quite a few people who have been openly hostile to the Department of Justice and the FBI. So I wish that President Biden would adhere to his oath of office to uphold the law by supporting his Justice Department, grant the pardon to his son. He did that. I'm not complaining about that. But he should not be attacking our justice system which is fair, was fair to Hunter Biden, and was fair to Donald Trump.
Yeah, I mean, you're saying that this is, in some respect, a gift to the incoming Trump administration. And in fact, a spokesperson for Donald Trump, Stephen Chung, says that this shows that the system of justice must be fixed and due process must be restored for all Americans, which is exactly what President Trump will do as soon as he returns to the White House with an overwhelming mandate from the American people. I mean, it sounds like this is indeed, as you're saying, a gift to the incoming administration.
Well, this certainly feeds the flames. We've always had people who attack the integrity of the justice system, and there are problems with prosecutorial systems like every other system, but our system of independent prosecutors being appointed by the Department of Justice has worked. Our independent counsel law worked for 20 years. We had independent counsels who reported to the District of Columbia Court of Appeals, but it was the Democrats who attacked that system when Ken Starr prosecuted Bill Clinton for perjury, and that we don't have an independent counsel law anymore, but we have the system of appointed independent special prosecutors through the Justice Department. But I don't think these are partisan attacks on prosecutors simply for doing their jobs help, whether it was attacks on Ken Starr in the 1990s, the attacks Hunter Biden, the attacks that President Biden has launched against the prosecution team in Delaware in the Hunter Biden case, or the repeated attacks on the Department of Justice and the FBI by numerous people associated with the incoming Trump administration, including at times the president-elect himself. This is very, very dangerous, this rhetoric that somehow prosecutions are politicized. So the answer is for the President of the United States to take over the Justice Department and politicize everything that much more and start pursuing his political enemies. And that's the type of rhetoric we're dealing with right now. And I think what President Biden said yesterday will only encourage that.
Yeah, so this idea of public trust in the Department of Justice being sort of undermined by decisions like this is something we've been hearing quite a lot. And you know, this idea, perhaps in some people's mind, that here is the President of the United States putting his family before the country. I mean, how does all of this look, do you think, to the average American?
Well, this situation does not look good at all. Let's remember that President Biden, the Justice Department did not appoint an independent prosecutor in the Donald Trump cases until almost 2 years into President Biden's term. And that's the reason those cases were so late being filed, and they simply ran out of time. President-elect Trump ran out the clock on those cases. President Biden was hostile to independent prosecutors from day one. Part of that may have been the problems that Hunter Biden has, or the problems that President Biden himself had with classified documents that he removed when he was vice president and stored at an office run by the University of Pennsylvania, where he just simply forgot about them. But the Biden administration has not been supportive of independent prosecutors and appointing independent prosecutors promptly in these cases. And I think that's part of the reason we are where we are today. An independent prosecutor should have been appointed to deal with January 6th and with Hunter Biden on January 20 of 2021. And these cases were allowed to drag on and on, in part because of the Biden administration's refusal to support the notion of independent counsels.
Okay, and just lastly, I mean, we've had people on this program saying that this decision has permanently tarnished the legacy of the Biden administration. Don't know if you agree with that. And just one other thought, I just want to get your opinion on this. I read something that sort of seems to sum this up quite neatly. One of the commentators said that it's a surprise that's not at all surprising, this decision by President Biden to pardon his son. What do you make of that?
It's certainly not surprising that the President of the United States would want to pardon his own son who's been convicted of felonies. And I don't blame him for that. But this administration has been tarred by ethics scandals, the president's abuse of classified information, between his vice presidency and his presidency was a serious matter. The fact that he left documents in the custody of the University of Pennsylvania through late 2022 and apparently simply forgot about them was a serious matter. His relationship with the University of Pennsylvania and the Penn Biden Center, I criticized strongly, and the quid pro quo for ambassadorships. We had scandals in the Biden administration, and the most tragic scandal was the cover-up of the president's capacity to serve a second term. People close to him in the White House knew that he was a one-term president. He had said he was going to run for one term and then pass the torch to the next generation. The Democratic Party should have had a primary, and Kamala Harris might very well have won that primary, but they ended up switching candidates in July with only 100 days to go. And Vice President Harris, in that scenario, really didn't stand a chance. So I don't think that the president was fair to his own country, to his party, by not sticking by his most important pledge, which was that he was going to serve one term and pass the torch to the next generation. And that didn't happen.
Okay, well, thank you very much indeed. We're going to have to leave it there. Richard Painter, thank you for speaking to us.
Thank you so much.
That's all we've got time for on Global News today. Thank you very much indeed for watching. Be sure to join us again tomorrow for more exclusive interviews. Until then, goodbye.